Hey, amazing viewers! Thanks for clicking on Harry Fictional Hub. Today's special feature is what if Harry discovered Dumbledore's signature on the Potter will theft records and bankrupt the ministry at age 7. Your support through likes, shares, and subscriptions helps us reach more story lovers around the world. Thank you for being part of this community. Now, let's escape into this wonderful story. Chapter 1. The document in the attic. The summer heat pressed down on Privet Drive like a smothering blanket. Most children enjoyed their summer holiday freedom, but for 7-year-old Harry Potter, it meant more chores, more hiding from Dudley, and more unexplained rules from his aunt and uncle. Today's particular torture involved cleaning the attic, a punishment for somehow ending up on the school roof while escaping Dudley's gang yesterday. Harry hadn't meant to do it. One moment he'd been running, the next he was sitting on the roof with no idea how he'd gotten there. As usual, the unexplainable meant punishment. And don't come down until it's spotless, Aunt Petunia had snapped, unfolding the ladder to the dusty space above. We're having guests next week, and I need to store some things properly. Harry wiped sweat from his forehead as he sorted through dusty boxes. The attic was stifling in July, but at least up here, he was alone. No Dudley throwing things at him, no Uncle Vernon's suspicious glares, no Aunt Petunia's endless list of chores. Broken toys, old clothes, holiday decorations, Harry muttered, organizing as he went. His methodical approach would get him out of this hot prison faster. Despite his age, Harry had learned efficiency through necessity. Chores were easier when you had a system. He pushed aside a heavy box of Vernon's old business files, revealing a small trunk tucked against the corner. Unlike the other boxes, this one was free of dust, as if it repelled the particles somehow. Harry frowned. He'd never seen it before, and something about it made the hair on his arms stand up. The trunk was elegant but simple, dark wood with brass fittings and a strange symbol engraved on the lock. It reminded Harry of a bird rising from flames. Curiosity overcoming caution, he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the lock, he jerked back with a hiss. A small drop of blood welled from his finger, pricked by some unseen mechanism. Before he could process what happened, the lock clicked open. "What in the—" Harry whispered, staring as the drop of his blood seemed to be absorbed into the wood. The lid opened silently, revealing neatly organized folders and parchments, not paper, but actual parchment like from history books. Each bore the same symbol as the trunk's lock. Harry glanced nervously toward the attic entrance. If Aunt Petunia caught him with something unusual, the consequences would be severe. Still, something deep inside told him this trunk was meant for him. Why else would it open to his touch, his blood? He carefully lifted the top folder. In elegant script across the front were the words, "Last Will and Testament of James and Lily Potter." Harry's heart stuttered. His parents. His actual parents, not the drunks who died in a car crash that his aunt and uncle always described with disgust. With trembling fingers, he opened the folder. The parchment inside glowed faintly, words shimmering as if freshly written. "We, James Fleamont Potter and Lily Evans Potter, being of sound mind and magic, do hereby declare this as our last will and testament." Magic? Harry blinked, then continued reading. The document detailed properties, investments, heirlooms, and a vault system at a place called Gringotts. According to this, Harry wasn't poor at all, he was wealthy. The Potters had left him everything. But it was the next section that made his blood run cold. Under no circumstances is our son, Harry James Potter, to be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley. Should we perish, Harry's guardianship shall pass to 1. Sirius Black, godfather by ritual, 2. Alice and Frank Longbottom 3. Minerva McGonagall 4. Andromeda and Ted Tonks. Harry stared at the words until they blurred. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was never meant to live with the Dursleys. Someone had ignored his parents' wishes. Beneath the will was another document labeled, "Audit Trail, Potter Family Vaults." The entries began November 1981, days after his parents had died, November 5, 1981, withdrawal of 50,000 galleons, authorized by Albus Dumbledore as Chief Warlock, War Orphan Relief Fund, December 12, 1981, withdrawal of 10,000 galleons, authorized by Albus Dumbledore as Chief Warlock, Hogwarts Scholarship Fund, January 3, 1982, transfer of Potter Cottage property deed to Ministry Historical Preservation, authorized by Albus Dumbledore as Magical Guardian. The list continued, page after page, year after year. All bearing the same elegant signature, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry's hands shook, but not from fear. A strange calm settled over him, a clarity he'd never experienced before. Someone had stolen from him. Someone had placed him with the Dursleys against his parents' wishes. Someone named Dumbledore had taken everything. "Boy! Are you finished up there?" Aunt Petunia's shrill voice broke through his thoughts. "Almost, Aunt Petunia," Harry called back, his voice steadier than he felt. He quickly gathered the documents and closed the trunk, noticing it locked itself immediately. To his surprise, the trunk shrunk to the size of a matchbox. Acting on instinct, Harry pocketed it and hurried to finish organizing the attic. By evening, a plan was forming. Harry had always been intelligent, his school report said as much, though he'd learned to hide it after Uncle Vernon's reaction to him outperforming Dudley. Now, that intelligence focused with laser precision on a single goal, finding out the truth. The next morning, Harry woke before dawn. He'd memorized one crucial detail from the documents, the location of this Gringotts place. Diagon Alley, accessible through a pub called the Leaky Cauldron on Charing Cross Road in London. Getting to London would be the first challenge. The Dursleys never took him anywhere if they could avoid it, but Harry had been paying attention during Vernon's complaints about train fares. He knew how much it would cost, and he knew where Aunt Petunia kept emergency money in a kitchen jar labeled Vacation Fund. £10 would be enough for a return ticket, with a bit left over. Harry waited until his aunt and uncle were arguing with Dudley about television privileges, then slipped into the kitchen and took exactly what he needed. He left the house through the back door, cut through Mrs. Figg's yard to avoid being seen, and walked quickly to the bus stop that would take him to the train station. The conductor raised an eyebrow at a 7-year-old traveling alone but accepted Harry's rehearsed explanation about meeting his dad who worked in the city. Harry had dressed in his least ragged clothes and combed his unruly hair as best he could. The trick, he discovered, was to act like you belonged wherever you were. 2 hours later, Harry stood on Charing Cross Road, searching for the pub mentioned in the documents. Pedestrians streamed past, none giving him a second glance. He almost missed it, a shabby-looking establishment wedged between a bookshop and a record store. Oddly, the people walking by seemed not to notice it at all, their eyes sliding from the bookshop to the record store as if nothing existed between. Taking a deep breath, Harry pushed open the door to the Leaky Cauldron. The interior was dim and smoky. Men and women in strange robes sat at tables, drinking from tankards and eating meals that smelled better than anything Aunt Petunia ever cooked. A bald man behind the bar looked up as Harry entered. "Lost, lad?" he called. Harry straightened his shoulders. "No, sir. I need to get to Diagon Alley, please." The barman studied him for a moment. "Bit young to be on your own, aren't you?" "My aunt's right behind me," Harry lied smoothly. "She's just paying the taxi." The barman nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Through the back, then. Tap the bricks, 3 up, 2 across from the trash bin." "Need me to show you?" "No thank you, sir. I remember." Another lie, but the instructions seemed simple enough. Harry hurried through the back door into a small courtyard with nothing but a trash bin and a brick wall. He counted carefully and tapped the brick 3 up and 2 across from the bin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the brick quivered and a small hole appeared, growing wider until it formed an archway large enough for even an adult to walk through. Beyond stretched a cobbled street that twisted and turned out of sight, lined with the strangest shops Harry had ever seen. Diagon Alley. The magical world his parents had belonged to, the world that should have been his. Harry stepped through the archway, which sealed itself behind him. The street bustled with activity, people in robes of every color, shops selling cauldrons, broomsticks, and creatures he'd only read about in fairy tales. But Harry didn't allow himself to be distracted. According to the documents, Gringotts was a massive white building at the far end of the alley. He made his way down the street, ignoring curious glances from shoppers wondering why a child wandered alone. The white marble building loomed ahead, its burnished bronze doors guarded by, Harry blinked, an actual goblin in a scarlet and gold uniform. Harry approached with determined steps, noting how the goblin's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd read enough fantasy books to know that respect mattered with such beings. "Good morning," Harry said politely, with a small bow. "I wish to speak with someone about my family's accounts, please." The goblin's expression didn't change, but he returned a curt nod and opened the door. Through the silver doors ahead, young wizard. Inside, Harry found himself in a vast marble hall. Hundreds of goblins sat on high stools behind long counters, weighing coins, examining jewels, and writing in ledgers. Harry approached the nearest available goblin. "Excuse me," he said, waiting until the goblin looked up from his work. "I need information about the Potter accounts, please." The goblin peered down at him. "And you are?" "Harry Potter, sir." The scratching of quills around them faltered momentarily. The goblin's eyes flicked to Harry's forehead, where the lightning scar was just visible beneath his fringe. "Do you have your key, Mr. Potter?" Harry shook his head. "No, but I have this." He carefully removed the trunk from his pocket, now restored to its original size, and placed it on the counter. "It opened with my blood." The goblin's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Wait here." He hopped down from his stool and disappeared through a side door. Minutes later, he returned with an older, more elaborately dressed goblin. "Mr. Potter, I am Griphook, manager of the Potter accounts. Please follow me." Harry followed Griphook through ornate hallways into a private office lined with ledgers and strange instruments. The goblin closed the door and cast a calculating look at Harry. "You are younger than expected for someone making inquiries about their accounts, Mr. Potter." Harry placed the trunk on the desk between them. "I found this yesterday. I didn't know anything about magic or my parents or this world until I read what was inside." Griphook's long fingers tapped the desk. "That is, unexpected. The Potter Vault Trust box should have been in our possession until your first Hogwarts letter. Its appearance to you suggests urgent family magic at work." He gestured to the trunk. "May I?" Harry nodded. Griphook didn't touch the trunk. Instead, he passed his hand over it, murmuring in a language Harry didn't recognize. The lock clicked open. "Blood sealed, as expected. Only a true Potter could access this," Griphook said, almost to himself. He carefully examined the documents inside, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "Mr. Potter, are you aware of what these documents suggest?" "That someone named Dumbledore has been taking money from my family's vaults without permission," Harry replied. "And that I was never supposed to live with my aunt and uncle." Griphook's sharp teeth showed in what might have been a smile. "Precisely. These are very serious allegations. Albus Dumbledore is a powerful wizard with many titles and positions. These documents suggest he has abused those positions to access Potter wealth." Harry leaned forward. "The documents are real, then?" "Oh yes. These are certified Gringotts statements, impossible to falsify." Griphook shuffled through more papers. "According to our records, Dumbledore claimed magical guardianship over you after your parents' death, citing emergency powers as chief warlock. However, this directly contradicts the will's stipulations. Can anything be done?" Harry asked. Griphook studied Harry for a long moment. "Mr. Potter, goblins value two things above all, gold and justice in financial matters. What Dumbledore has done violates both. Yes, something can be done, but it will require careful planning. The wizard has many allies. I don't, Harry said simply. Perhaps not yet, Griphook replied. But you are the last Potter, heir to one of Britain's oldest magical houses. That carries weight, even for a child. He tapped a clawed finger against the documents. And you have evidence of theft bearing Dumbledore's own signature. Harry felt a glimmer of hope. What do I do first? Claim your heir ring, Griphook said decisively. It will grant you certain protections and acknowledge your standing, even at your young age. The goblin produced a small box from a desk drawer and opened it to reveal a gold ring with the same phoenix symbol Harry had seen on the trunk. Your blood, Mr. Potter, if you please. Harry didn't hesitate. He held out his finger, and Griphook pricked it with a small, ceremonial knife. A drop of blood fell onto the ring, which glowed briefly before returning to normal. Place it on your right index finger, Griphook instructed. When Harry slid the ring on, a warm sensation flowed up his arm and throughout his body. The ring resized itself to fit perfectly. The Potter magic accepts you, Griphook noted with satisfaction. Now, we plan. For the next hour, Harry and Griphook discussed strategy. The goblin explained wizarding law concerning inheritances, the structure of the Ministry of Magic, and Dumbledore's various positions of power. Harry absorbed it all, asking sharp questions that made Griphook raise his eyebrows more than once. You will need allies beyond Gringotts, Griphook said finally. Other old families who might have suffered similar abuses. We can provide a list of accounts showing suspicious activity since 1981. How do I contact them? Harry asked practically. I can't exactly send letters from my aunt and uncle's house. Gringotts can provide a secure mail service, for a fee, of course. Harry nodded. And I'll need books about wizarding law and customs. I need to understand this world. There are several bookshops in the alley, Griphook agreed. I recommend Obscurus books for legal texts. Tell them you're collecting for your family solicitor. Harry's mind raced with plans and possibilities. I'll need money. Griphook produced a small leather pouch. This is connected directly to your trust vault. It will provide what you need without depleting the main Potter vaults Dumbledore has been accessing. He won't know I've been here. Not from us, Griphook assured him. Client confidentiality is sacred to goblins. However, there may be monitoring charms on you or your residence. The heir ring will disrupt minor tracking, but caution is still advised. Harry thought of Mrs. Fig and her strange cats that seemed to watch him constantly. How do I check for monitoring charms? There's a discreet magical items shop off Nocturne Alley, an offshoot of Diagon, called Arcturus's Artifacts. Ask for a revealer. It's a legitimate security device even a child might reasonably purchase. By the time Harry left Gringotts, his head spun with information, but his path was clearer than it had ever been. He had 3 stops to make before returning to Privet Drive, the bookshop, the artifacts shop, and Elop's Owl Emporium. If he was going to correspond secretly, he'd need his own owl. At Obscurus Books, Harry selected texts on wizarding genealogy, magical law, and a history of the Ministry of Magic. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow at his selections but accepted Harry's rehearsed explanation about running errands for a family solicitor. Arcturus's Artifacts proved more challenging to locate, a narrow shop tucked between larger establishments on a side street. Inside, amid curious devices and instruments, Harry purchased a revealer, a silver disc that vibrated in the presence of monitoring charms, and a small enchanted journal that would send written messages directly to a twin journal Griphook now possessed. His final stop was Elop's, where a small tawny owl immediately caught his attention. Unlike the other birds that hooted and flapped, this one observed him with intelligent amber eyes, calm and assessing. That's a smart one, the shopkeeper commented. Breeds known for discretion and finding difficult addresses. Perfect for secret correspondence. Harry purchased the owl, whom he named Archimedes after the wise owl in a book he'd read at school. The return to Privet Drive required careful timing. Harry arrived back as the Dursleys were sitting down to dinner, slipping in through his usual entry point, the loose kitchen window, and hurrying to his cupboard. The trunk, now shrunk again, remained safely in his pocket. The books and revealer were hidden in Archimedes' cage, which he concealed in the overgrown garden shed. The owl would roost in the nearby woods until needed. That night, Harry used the revealer in his cupboard. It vibrated frantically, confirming his suspicions, monitoring charms everywhere. According to his new books, such charms typically reported to the caster but didn't provide visual or audio surveillance. Still, Harry would need somewhere secure to study and plan. The answer came to him days later. The primary school library remained open during summer for reading programs. Mrs. Perkins, the librarian who had always been kind to Harry, was delighted when he asked to use the study carrels to prepare for next term. Such dedication, she praised, giving him his own corner where he could spread out his work. Little did she know that between normal schoolbooks, Harry was studying magical law and writing correspondence to Griphook and other potential allies. 2 weeks into his research, a breakthrough came in the form of an unexpected encounter. Harry sat in his usual library corner, a wizarding law book concealed inside a geography text, when a girl with bushy brown hair peered over his shoulder. "That's not geography," she said matter-of-factly. Harry jumped, hastily covering the page. "I don't know what you mean." The girl raised an eyebrow. "That's a book about magical inheritance law. I have the same one at home." Harry stared at her, speechless. She couldn't be more than 7 or 8, like him. "I'm Hermione Granger," she continued when he didn't respond. "I got my books in Diagon Alley last month after I made my parents' car keys float into the pool. Professor McGonagall came to explain about accidental magic and gave us an early orientation because I was showing signs so young." She said all this very fast, then lowered her voice. "Are you a wizard too?" Harry glanced around to ensure they were alone. "Harry Potter," he introduced himself. Hermione's eyes widened comically. "Harry Potter? Really? You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts. Did you know?" "No," Harry admitted. "I only found out about magic recently." "What exactly do these books say about me?" "That you defeated a Dark Lord as a baby. But nobody knows how." Hermione studied him curiously. "Why are you reading about inheritance law? And why are you hiding it?" Harry hesitated, then made a split-second decision. His instincts about people were usually good, and something told him Hermione could be trusted. "Because someone's been stealing from my family vaults, and I'm trying to stop them." Hermione's expression shifted from curiosity to outrage. "That's terrible. Who would do that?" "Someone powerful. Someone everyone trusts." Harry watched her reaction carefully. "Is that why you're studying alone? Can't you ask for help from the magical authorities?" Harry shook his head. "The person stealing is one of the authorities." Hermione sat down beside him, determination hardening her features. "Then you need proper research assistance. I'm the best in my year at school, and my parents have access to legal databases through their dental practice." "Dental practice?" "They're dentists," Hermione explained. "But they've been taking courses on business law to manage their practice better. Some principles might apply to your situation." For the first time since finding the trunk, Harry felt something like genuine hope. "Would you really help me?" "Of course," Hermione said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "That's what friends do, isn't it?" Friends. Harry had never had a friend before. "Tell me everything," she said, opening a fresh notebook. "Start at the beginning." Over the next few hours, Harry explained his discovery, the meeting with Griphook, and his budding plan to expose Dumbledore's theft and the Ministry's complicity. Hermione asked precise, thoughtful questions and took meticulous notes. "This is bigger than just theft," she concluded. "It's conspiracy and fraud at the highest levels of government. We need to approach this systematically." Together, they developed a research schedule. Hermione would investigate Muggle legal precedents that might apply to wizarding law, while Harry continued corresponding with Griphook about potential allies among other affected families. The Longbottoms were mentioned in your parents' will, Hermione noted. What happened to them? According to Griphook, they were attacked shortly after my parents. They're alive but in a magical hospital. Their son Neville lives with his grandmother. She might be an ally, Hermione suggested. If Dumbledore bypassed your parents' will, he might have done the same with the Longbottoms. That evening, Harry sent Archimedes with letters to Augusta Longbottom and Amelia Bones, whom Griphook had identified as the head of magical law enforcement and a stickler for proper procedure. The letters were carefully crafted, mentioning only financial irregularities that might affect their families, with an invitation to correspond further. Days passed as Harry established a routine. Mornings were spent doing chores for the Dursleys, afternoons in the library with Hermione, and evenings analyzing responses from his growing network of contacts. Augusta Longbottom's reply had been cautious but interested. Amelia Bones requested specific evidence before committing to anything. 3 other families with orphaned heirs expressed similar concerns about their accounts. Meanwhile, Hermione's research revealed a crucial detail: wizarding inheritance law recognized mature minor provisions for heirs who demonstrated financial acumen beyond their years. With proper evidence and testing, Harry could potentially claim limited control of his vaults despite his age. A month after discovering the trunk, Harry returned to Gringotts, this time accompanied by Hermione and her unwitting parents, who believed they were simply opening an account for their daughter. While the Grangers spoke with another goblin, Hermione slipped away to join Harry in Griphook's office. "We've completed our audit," Griphook announced, pushing a thick folder across the desk. "The evidence is damning. Since November 1981, approximately 60% of the Potter fortune has been diverted through various channels. Most went to ministry departments, but significant amounts were transferred to private vaults, including one belonging to Dumbledore himself." Harry felt his face grow hot with anger. How much? Several million galleons. The Potter fortune was vast, one of the largest in wizarding Britain. Even with these thefts, you remain wealthy, but the principle remains: this was systematic looting of an orphan's inheritance. Hermione squeezed Harry's hand supportively. "What's our next step?" Griphook seemed pleased by her inclusion. "Miss Granger, I presume. Mr. Potter mentioned a brilliant young witch joining our cause." Hermione blushed but maintained her businesslike demeanor. "Harry needs to qualify as a mature minor to gain control of his vaults." "Precisely," Griphook agreed. "We've scheduled a financial aptitude test with the neutral evaluators from the International Banking Confederation. If Mr. Potter passes, he can legally challenge Dumbledore's guardianship on financial grounds." Harry nodded. "And then?" "Then," Griphook said with a predatory smile, "we call in the debts. The Ministry has been borrowing against Potter assets for years. If those loans are suddenly due in full, the Ministry would go bankrupt," Hermione finished, eyes wide. "Unless they agree to our terms," Harry said quietly. "Justice for my parents and all the other families affected." The aptitude test was scheduled for the following week. Harry and Hermione dedicated every spare moment to preparation, drilling financial concepts and wizarding legal precedents until Harry could recite them in his sleep. The night before the test, Harry sat in his cupboard, writing in the enchanted journal by Wandlight, another device he'd purchased from Arcturus's artifacts. "Griphook, what happens if I fail tomorrow?" The goblin's precise script appeared moments later. "You won't fail, Mr. Potter. You've demonstrated remarkable aptitude for one so young. However, if the unexpected occurs, we have contingency plans. Augusta Longbottom has agreed to file a formal complaint with the Wisengamot regarding the mishandling of her son's assets. Amelia Bones is discreetly reviewing the documentation we provided. The wheels are in motion regardless of tomorrow's outcome." Harry drew strength from those words. He wasn't alone anymore. He had allies, resources, and most importantly, a friend in Hermione who believed in him completely. The test itself proved less intimidating than expected. 3 elderly goblins presented Harry with complex financial scenarios, investment opportunities, and ethical dilemmas. Drawing on his intensive preparation and natural intelligence, Harry navigated each challenge methodically. When the senior evaluator announced he had passed with the highest score they'd seen from a minor, Harry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was one step closer to justice. The certificate naming him a financially mature minor granted Harry limited control over his vaults, enough to review transactions, halt future withdrawals, and most crucially, call due any outstanding loans. "We'll proceed gradually," Griphook advised during their strategy session afterward. "First, a formal letter to Dumbledore as your magical guardian, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns about your financial future. This gives him an opportunity to explain himself." "He won't admit anything," Harry predicted. "No, but his response, or lack thereof, will be documented evidence of negligence, strengthening our case." Hermione tapped her quill against her notebook. "What about the press? If people knew the boy who lived was questioning Dumbledore's actions?" "Not yet," Harry said firmly. "Dumbledore controls too many narratives. We need irrefutable evidence and the right moment." The letter to Dumbledore was sent the following day via official Gringotts Owl. Harry imagined the old wizard's surprise upon receiving formal correspondence from the child he'd abandoned on a doorstep 6 years ago. 3 days later, the response arrived, not to Harry, but to Griphook. In flowing purple script, Dumbledore expressed concern about unauthorized communications with the Potter heir and reminded Gringotts that all matters concerning Harry Potter's welfare should be directed to his magical guardian. Griphook's sharp teeth gleamed as he read it aloud. "Perfect. He's attempting to intimidate us while admitting he's intercepting your correspondence." "That's illegal, isn't it?" Hermione asked. "Mail tampering?" "Absolutely," Griphook confirmed. "Especially when directed to a recognized heir." With this evidence added to their growing file, Harry authorized the next step, a formal audit notification to the Ministry of Magic, alerting them that the Potter estate was reviewing all outstanding loans with potential acceleration of payment terms. The reaction was immediate. Percy Weasley, junior assistant to the minister, arrived at Gringotts the very next day, requesting a meeting with the Potter account manager. "Minister Fudge is most concerned about these irregularities," the young man stated stiffly. "He wishes to assure the Potter heir that any misunderstandings can be quickly resolved. The minister is welcome to address his concerns directly to Mr. Potter during business hours at Gringotts," Griphook replied smoothly. Percy blanched. Surely a 7-year-old child isn't managing these matters personally. Mr. Potter has been certified as a financially mature minor by the International Banking Confederation. His instructions regarding his inheritance are legally binding. This news traveled quickly. By evening, Griphook reported increased activity around Harry's accounts, with several ministry departments attempting to document retroactive approval for their loans. "Too late," the goblin chuckled. "We've already secured the original paperwork bearing Dumbledore's unauthorized signatures." The next day, Harry received an ornate letter bearing the Hogwarts crest, his first direct communication from Dumbledore. "Dear Harry, it has come to my attention that you have been engaging with Gringotts Bank regarding your family's accounts. While your interest in your heritage is commendable, there are complex matters regarding your parents' legacy that require mature guidance. I would be delighted to meet with you at your convenience to explain the arrangements made for your benefit after that terrible Halloween night. As your magical guardian, I have always acted with your best interests at heart. Please let me know when you might be available for tea at Hogwarts, where we can discuss these matters in a comfortable setting. Yours sincerely, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry read the letter twice, noting its carefully neutral tone and subtle attempt to establish authority. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no explanation for ignoring his parents' will, just a benevolent invitation that positioned Dumbledore as the reasonable adult dealing with a confused child. "He's good," Harry admitted, passing the letter to Hermione. Makes it sound like I'm just curious about my heritage, not accusing him of theft. It's manipulative, Hermione declared after reading it. Notice how he says he's acted in your best interests without specifying what those actions were. And the invitation to Hogwarts puts you on his territory, where he controls everything. Harry nodded. Exactly why I won't meet him there. If we meet at all, it will be at Gringotts with witnesses. Harry's response, drafted with Hermione's and Griphook's input, was polite but firm. Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, thank you for your letter. I would indeed appreciate discussing my parents' legacy with you. As these are primarily financial matters, I suggest meeting at Gringotts Bank at your convenience. My account manager will be present to address any technical questions. I look forward to hearing your explanation regarding the numerous withdrawals from my family vaults made under your signature, as well as your decision to place me with the Dursley family against my parents' explicit wishes as stated in their will. Respectfully, Harry James Potter, heir to the ancient house of Potter. Hermione insisted on adding the formal title, explaining that it reminded Dumbledore he wasn't dealing with just any child, but the heir to an ancient magical lineage. Now we wait, Griphook said when the letter was sent. He'll realize you have evidence of his actions and will either attempt to explain them away or try to regain control of the situation. What's our contingency if he tries to force me back under his control? Harry asked practically. The heir ring provides certain protections, Griphook reminded him. Additionally, we've prepared emancipation paperwork citing magical guardian negligence, should it become necessary. Madame Bones has agreed to process it immediately if evidence of further misconduct emerges. As they left Griphook's office, Harry felt a strange sensation, like being watched. He turned quickly, glimpsing a tall figure in purple robes disappearing around a corner. Without drawing attention, he guided Hermione toward a different exit than planned. Someone's following us, he whispered. Hermione nodded almost imperceptibly. Dumbledore? I think so. We need to separate. Meet at our backup location in an hour. Their backup location, a small Muggle cafe near Charing Cross Road, had been Hermione's suggestion. A place neither magical nor connected to either of us, she'd explained when establishing their contingency plans. Harry took a convoluted route through Diagon Alley, ducking into shops and doubling back until he was certain he'd lost any pursuit. When he finally arrived at the cafe, Hermione was already waiting, a pot of tea and plate of biscuits on the table. Any problems? He asked as he slid into the seat across from her. None. But this confirms it, Dumbledore is worried enough to have you followed. Our evidence must be more damaging than we thought. Harry frowned. Or he's planning something. We need to accelerate our timeline. That evening, Harry sent instructions to Gryffindor via their enchanted journals. Proceed with Phase 2. Contact all allies for simultaneous action. Phase 2 involved each affected family filing formal complaints with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, creating a pattern that even Dumbledore couldn't easily dismiss. Augusta Longbottom's influence would ensure these complaints received proper attention, while Amelia Bones would oversee the investigations personally. The final component involved the loans. Harry authorized Gringotts to call due all Ministry debts secured by Potter assets, effective immediately. The Ministry would have 7 days to repay over 12 million galleons or face financial collapse. This will cause chaos, Hermione warned. Are you sure? Harry nodded grimly. They've had my family's money for 6 years. They've had me living in a cupboard while spending my inheritance. I'm done waiting for justice. The following morning, owls flooded the Ministry with formal notices, legal complaints, and the devastating loan recalls. By noon, the Daily Prophet had released a special edition with the headline, Boy Who Lived Declares Financial War on Ministry. Potter heir calls due millions in loans, alleges systematic theft. The article detailed the financial catastrophe unfolding at the Ministry, with departments scrambling to account for years of spending backed by Potter gold. More damaging were the quotes from Augusta Longbottom and other prominent families alleging similar mismanagement of their orphaned heirs' estates. Minister Fudge issued a blustering statement about administrative oversights and promised a thorough investigation. Noticeably absent was any comment from Albus Dumbledore, who had reportedly left Hogwarts on urgent business. That urgent business became apparent that evening when the Dursleys' front door blasted open, revealing the tall figure of Albus Dumbledore in midnight blue robes, his eyes lacking their famous twinkle. "Harry Potter," he announced to the cowering Dursleys, "I've come to take you somewhere safe. There's been a misunderstanding that we must address immediately." But Harry wasn't there. Having anticipated this move, he'd already implemented the final phase of his plan, sanctuary at Gringotts, where wizarding law prohibited the removal of an heir under financial protection without goblin approval. As Dumbledore searched Privet Drive in growing frustration, Harry sat in a comfortable chamber deep within Gringotts. Beside him, Hermione pored over the latest legal briefings. Across the table, Griphook and a team of goblin lawyers finalized the terms that would reshape the relationship between Gringotts, the Ministry, and Wizarding Orphans forever. "Dumbledore has arrived at your relative's home," Griphook reported, checking a special monitoring charm. "He appears displeased." Harry allowed himself a small smile. "I imagine he is. When does Madame Bones expect to serve the warrants?" "Within the hour." The evidence was sufficient to convince the senior Wizengamot members not under Dumbledore's influence. Financial crimes against children, even Dumbledore isn't immune to those charges. Hermione squeezed Harry's hand supportively. "It's really happening." Harry nodded, feeling not triumph but a solemn satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge but justice, for himself, for his parents, and for every child whose inheritance had been plundered by those meant to protect them. "What happens now?" Hermione asked. Harry looked down at the Potter heir ring gleaming on his finger. "Now we rebuild. The Ministry will be restructured under new financial oversight. Dumbledore will face inquiry. And I." He paused, considering. "I'll finally live the life my parents wanted for me." As if on cue, the chamber door opened to admit Augusta Longbottom, regal in formal robes, and beside her, a round-faced boy who could only be Neville. Behind them stood Amelia Bones, her monocle gleaming in the goblin-forged lamps. "Mr. Potter," Madame Longbottom said with a formal nod. "Your actions have set in motion changes long overdue in our world. My grandson and I are honored to stand with you as allies." Amelia Bones stepped forward. "The warrants have been served. Dumbledore is being escorted to the Ministry as we speak. Minister Fudge has called an emergency session of the Wizengamot." She smiled slightly. "They're in quite a panic over the financial situation." "Good," Harry said simply. "They should be." As the adults discussed legal procedures, Harry introduced himself to Neville, who seemed shocked to be meeting the famous Harry Potter under such circumstances. "Gran says our mums were best friends," Neville said shyly. "And that we were supposed to grow up together." "We were," Harry confirmed. "That's being corrected now." Later that night, after the others had departed, Harry stood with Griphook on the steps of Gringotts, looking out over a Diagon alley transformed by the evening's news. Whispers of the boy who lives return and his stunning accusations against Dumbledore and the Ministry had spread like wildfire. "The financial audits will continue for months," Griphook noted. "Many careers will end. Some may face Azkaban." "And the Potter fortune?" Harry asked. "Much can be recovered. The goblins have ways of tracing magical transactions. What cannot be recovered will be compensated through negotiated settlements." Griphook studied Harry with something like respect. "You've accomplished more at 7 than most wizards do in a lifetime, Mr. Potter." Harry thought about the trunk that had started it all. Had it been mere chance that led him to find it that hot summer day? Or something more, his parents' magic perhaps, reaching out to protect their son when he needed it most? "I had help," Harry acknowledged, thinking of Hermione's brilliant mind, Griphook's cunning, and the growing network of allies who'd recognized the justice of his cause. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Finding a proper magical guardian. Establishing a permanent residence. Preparing for his eventual arrival at Hogwarts, where he would face Dumbledore not as a manipulated orphan, but as the heir to House Potter, with allies, resources, and the confidence that came from standing up for what was right. But tonight, watching the magical world buzzing with the news of his return, Harry allowed himself to feel, for perhaps the first time in his young life, that the future held promise. Not because he was the boy who lived, but because he was Harry Potter, son of James and Lily, who had found his way home. Chapter 2, The Goblin Conspiracy. 6 months had transformed Harry Potter's world entirely. The small, undernourished boy who had once lived in a cupboard now sat in a comfortable study within Gringotts' residential quarters, surrounded by legal tomes and financial documents. Winter sunlight streamed through enchanted windows that mimicked the weather outside while maintaining the comfortable temperature of the underground chambers. "The Wizengamot session is scheduled for tomorrow," Hermione said, looking up from a thick legal volume. Her bushy hair was partially tamed by a practical headband, and a quill tucked behind her ear left a small ink smudge on her cheek. "Dumbledore still holds the chief warlock position, despite everything. That complicates matters." Harry nodded, adding another note to his already extensive preparation. At 8 years old, his birthday had passed during the months of legal battles, he had become an unlikely revolution's figurehead. The boy who lived, now also known in certain circles as the boy who sued. "We expected that," he replied. "The old guard protects its own. But Madame Bones confirms we have enough votes to force the financial inquiry through, even with Dumbledore presiding." A soft knock interrupted them as Griphook entered, carrying a polished wooden box bearing the Potter crest. The goblin had become Harry's most steadfast ally, his natural financial acumen complemented by a surprising streak of loyalty once earned. "The preparations are complete, Mr. Potter. The inheritance ritual can proceed at sundown as tradition demands." Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione, who gave him an encouraging nod. They had researched this ritual extensively. It would formally recognize Harry as the Potter heir in magic as well as law, granting him access to family magics previously dormant. More importantly, it would cement his status beyond what even Dumbledore could challenge. "Thank you, Griphook. I'll be ready." The goblin hesitated, an unusual occurrence that immediately caught Harry's attention. "There is another matter. Our surveillance indicates increased activity around both Hogwarts and the Ministry today. Dumbledore appears to be gathering his allies." "He knows," Harry concluded. "Someone in the Department of Inheritance must have leaked information about tonight's ritual." "Precisely." Griphook's sharp teeth gleamed in what passed for a goblin smile. "However, we anticipated such a breach. False information regarding the timing was intentionally planted. Dumbledore likely believes the ritual is scheduled for midnight." Harry allowed himself a small smile. "Giving us plenty of time to complete it before he can interfere." "Well done, Griphook." After the goblin departed, Hermione looked at Harry with concern. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Harry considered the question honestly. The past 6 months had taught him the value of acknowledging his feelings rather than burying them as he'd done at the Dursleys. "Not about the ritual itself," he admitted. "But its consequences, yes. Once I claim the Potter magics formally, there's no going back. Dumbledore will see it as a declaration of war." "He's the one who started this war," Hermione reminded him fiercely. "The moment he ignored your parents' will and stole from your vaults." Harry nodded, grateful as always for her unwavering support. Hermione Granger had proven to be not just brilliant but fiercely loyal. Her parents, initially concerned about their daughter's involvement in wizarding legal matters, had become valuable allies themselves. Dr. Granger's systematic approach to problem-solving had proven surprisingly applicable to dismantling magical bureaucracy. "I received another letter from Neville," Harry said, changing the subject as he picked up a parchment from his desk. "Augusta has been teaching him about the Wizengamot alliances. The Longbottoms traditionally held seats in the progressive faction." "That aligns with what we found in the political histories," Hermione agreed. The Potters and Longbottoms were often allied on reform legislation. Your grandfather was quite the political force. The mention of his family history still gave Harry a warm feeling. After years of believing the Dursleys' lies about his worthless parents, discovering the truth about the noble house of Potter had been both vindicating and painful. James Potter had been more than a layabout drunk, he had been a talented orator from an ancient magical lineage. Lily Evans Potter, far from being a worthless freak, had been a brilliant witch with groundbreaking research in charm theory. Learning these truths had only deepened Harry's resolve to restore his family's honor and hold accountable those who had betrayed their memory. As sundown approached, Harry changed into formal robes of deep crimson with the Potter crest embroidered in gold over the heart. They had been specially commissioned for this occasion, his first public embrace of his heritage. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself compared to the boy in oversized hand-me-downs who had first stumbled into Gringotts. "You look like your father," came a soft voice from the doorway. Harry turned to see Augusta Longbottom standing there, regal in formal black robes trimmed with gold. Behind her stood Neville, looking uncomfortable in similar attire. "Madam Longbottom," Harry greeted with the formal half-bow they had practiced. "I'm honored by your presence tonight. The alliance between Potter and Longbottom has endured for generations," she replied formally, then allowed her expression to soften slightly. "Your parents would be proud, Mr. Potter. Particularly your mother, she never suffered fools or thieves gladly." The mention of his mother brought a lump to Harry's throat. "Thank you. That means a great deal." Neville stepped forward, offering his hand somewhat nervously. Hello again, Harry." Despite their correspondence, this was only their second in-person meeting. Neville Longbottom was a round-faced boy with kind eyes and a hesitant manner that belied the quiet strength Harry had glimpsed in his letters. "Hello, Neville. I'm glad you could come." Harry shook his hand firmly. "Your insights about the Wisengamot families have been incredibly helpful." Neville flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "Gran's been teaching me since I was little. Says I need to understand our place in society even if I'm—" He trailed off, looking down. "Even if you're what?" Harry prompted gently. "Not very magical," Neville admitted in a whisper. "Gran thinks I might be nearly a squib." Augusta Longbottom's lips tightened, but she didn't contradict her grandson. Harry studied Neville thoughtfully. "Have you ever tried using someone else's wand?" Neville blinked in surprise. "I use my father's. Gran says it's an honor." Harry glanced at Augusta, then back to Neville. "I've been reading about wand lore. Wands choose the wizard, Neville. They don't work as well for someone they didn't choose." Augusta looked ready to object, but Harry continued respectfully. "Madam Longbottom, I understand honoring Frank's legacy. But might Neville's magic express itself more strongly with a wand that chose him specifically?" A brief silence followed before Augusta nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, Mr. Potter. We shall visit Ollivanders after the Wisengamot session tomorrow." Neville's expression brightened considerably. "Really, Gran? A proper heir needs a proper wand," she said firmly, though Harry noticed a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Now, I believe we have a ritual to attend." The Gringotts ritual chamber lay deep beneath the bank, accessible only by a special cart that descended far below even the high-security vaults. Built from ancient stone carved with runes and symbols that pulsed with magic older than Hogwarts itself, the chamber radiated power. A circle of goblin elders awaited them, led by Ragnarok, the Gringotts director who rarely dealt directly with wizards. That he presided personally spoke volumes about the importance Gringotts placed on tonight's events, and perhaps, Harry thought, about goblin interest in undermining Dumbledore's influence. "Heir Potter," Ragnarok greeted, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. "You come seeking recognition of your blood right before magic itself." "I do," Harry answered as they had rehearsed. "Step forward into the circle of judgment." Harry moved to the center of an intricate pattern inlaid with gold and silver on the chamber floor. Around him stood his witnesses, Hermione, the Longbottoms, Amelia Bones, and representatives from 3 other families whose orphaned heirs had suffered similar financial exploitation. Griphook approached bearing the wooden box from earlier. The rings of House Potter await their rightful bearer. When opened, the box revealed 3 rings nested in velvet, a gold signet bearing the Potter crest, a platinum band inlaid with runes, and a simple bronze ring set with a red stone. The head ring you cannot claim until your majority, Ragnarok explained, indicating the gold signet. But the heir ring is your right by blood, and the protectorate ring by magic's recognition of your need. Harry extended his right hand as instructed. Griphook placed the platinum heir ring on his index finger and the bronze protectorate ring on his middle finger. For a moment, nothing happened. Then heat surged through Harry's body, not painful but intense, like standing before a roaring fire. The rings glowed, resizing themselves to fit perfectly. The runes on the platinum band shimmered with inner light, while the red stone in the bronze ring seemed to swirl with fire. Magic recognizes Hadrian James Potter as true heir to the noble and most ancient house of Potter, Ragnarok intoned. Let all present bear witness. A golden light surrounded Harry briefly before settling into his skin like a warm embrace. He felt something unlock within him, knowledge and power that had always been his birthright but had lain dormant until now. The ritual is complete, Ragnarok declared. May you bring honor to your house, young heir. As the witnesses offered congratulations, Harry felt a sudden chill. The protectorate ring on his finger turned ice-cold for a brief moment before warming again. Griphook noticed his reaction immediately. The wards, the goblin said tersely. Someone attempts to breach them. Ragnarok barked orders in gobbledygook, sending younger goblins scrambling. It seems Dumbledore discovered our deception more quickly than anticipated, he told Harry. He approaches the bank with several wizards. Harry exchanged glances with Amelia Bones, who stepped forward. As head of the DMLE, I should handle this. His actions constitute attempted interference with a legal inheritance ritual. With respect, Madam Bones, Harry said carefully, Dumbledore has significant political influence over your Aurors. Perhaps we should approach this, strategically. Amelia's eyebrow rose, but a small smile played at her lips. What do you suggest, Mr. Potter? Let him enter, alone. The ritual is complete, so he can't stop it. Instead, let him see the consequences of his actions directly. Augusta Longbottom nodded approvingly. A confrontation in controlled circumstances, on your ground rather than his. Wise. Ragnarok considered Harry with newfound respect. The boy thinks like a goblin. Very well. Dumbledore may enter the outer chamber, but no further without surrendering his wand. As the others moved to the adjacent antechamber, Hermione lingered. Are you sure about this, Harry? Dumbledore is incredibly powerful. Harry touched the rings on his hand. So was Voldemort, supposedly. Yet here I am. He smiled at her concerned expression. I'll be careful, Hermione. But I need to face him directly at some point. Better here, with goblin wards and our allies nearby, than somewhere he controls. 15 minutes later, Albus Dumbledore stood in the antechamber of Gringotts ritual halls, his purple robes and long silver beard a stark contrast to the stern goblin architecture. Despite the lateness of the hour, his eyes twinkled as if he'd just arrived for afternoon tea. Good evening, he said pleasantly. I was informed there might be a young student of mine here requiring assistance. Harry stepped forward from the shadows, conscious of the formal robes that declared his status and the rings now visible on his hand. I'm not your student yet, headmaster. And I require no assistance. Dumbledore's expression shifted subtly, surprise quickly masked by grandfatherly concern. Harry, my boy. I've been quite worried about you. Your disappearance from your aunt and uncle's home caused quite a stir. I doubt that, Harry replied evenly. Considering you never checked on me once in 6 years. A flicker of something, guilt. Annoyance, crossed Dumbledore's face. Perhaps we could speak privately, There are complex matters regarding your safety that I'd be happy to explain. We can speak here, Harry said, gesturing to the small conference table in the antechamber. Though I should warn you that as this is Gringotts territory, our conversation falls under banking privacy laws. Nothing said here can be used against me in Wizengamot proceedings. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. You seem remarkably well informed for a child of 8. I've had excellent teachers. Harry sat at the table, indicating Dumbledore should do the same. 6 months of legal education tends to accelerate one's understanding of certain matters. The old wizard settled into the chair opposite Harry, arranging his robes with practiced dignity. I understand you've developed some concerns about your parents' estate. Concerns? Harry's voice remained calm, though his fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Is that what you call the systematic theft of over 7 million galleons from my family vaults? Or perhaps you're referring to your decision to place me with abusive relatives against my parents' explicit wishes? Dumbledore sighed heavily, the very picture of a misunderstood benefactor. Harry, everything I've done has been to protect you. The financial arrangements were necessary to ensure proper resources for your future safety. As for your placement with the Dursleys, blood wards provided protection that no magical household could match. Blood wards, Harry repeated. Fascinating theory. Except Gringotts Cursebreakers found no such wards at Privet Drive. They found monitoring charms, magical suppressors, and tracking spells, all keyed to you, but no protective blood wards. For the first time, Dumbledore looked genuinely startled. His fingers twitched toward his robe pocket, where his wand would be, before he visibly restrained himself. The wards were subtle, operating on your mother's sacrifice. My mother's sacrifice protected me from Voldemort, Harry interrupted, noting how Dumbledore flinched at the name. It had nothing to do with my aunt. You wanted me ignorant, malleable, and desperate for any scrap of affection the magical world might offer. A perfect weapon to point at Voldemort when he returns. Dumbledore's expression hardened. You cannot possibly understand the complexities. I understand perfectly, Harry cut in. I've seen the prophecy record in the Department of Mysteries ledgers. I know you believe Voldemort will return. What I don't understand is why that justified stealing from me and condemning me to a childhood of neglect. A tense silence fell between them. Harry could sense the headmaster reassessing him, those blue eyes no longer twinkling but calculating. You've accomplished impressive things these past months, Dumbledore finally said. But you are playing a dangerous game, Harry. There are forces at work beyond your comprehension, people who would use you for their own ends. You mean like you've been doing? Harry asked pointedly. Dumbledore leaned forward, his voice lowering. I have made mistakes. I acknowledge that. But my intentions were, and remain, your ultimate survival. Lord Voldemort will return, and when he does, you must be prepared. On that much, we agree, Harry said. Which is why I've arranged proper magical education, safe accommodation, and preserved what remains of my family resources, all things you should have ensured years ago as my guardian. Dumbledore's hand moved with unexpected speed. Harry glimpsed a wand appearing from the old wizard's sleeve a moment before Griphook shouted a warning. But Harry's new rings flared with protective magic, and Dumbledore's whispered spell, intended to confound or perhaps obliviate, rebounded in a shower of golden sparks. The headmaster jerked backward as if struck, genuine shock evident on his face. Potter family magic, Harry explained calmly, though his heart raced. The rings protect the heir from mental manipulation. You really should have researched that before trying to alter my memories. Goblin guards appeared instantly, spears leveled at Dumbledore. From the main chamber, Amelia Bones emerged, her wand drawn and expression thunderous. Attempting to cast on a minor without guardian consent or Wizengamot sanction, she stated coldly. Even you are not above such laws, Albus. Dumbledore rose slowly, hands visible. A misunderstanding. I merely wished to calm what appeared to be an agitated child. Save it for the Wizengamot, Amelia replied. You're fortunate we're in the midst of sensitive political negotiations, or I'd arrest you here and now. Harry remained seated, outwardly composed despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I believe our conversation is concluded, Headmaster. I'll see you at tomorrow's session. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, a reassessment, perhaps even a reluctant respect. Indeed you shall, Mr. Potter. It seems I have underestimated you significantly. He inclined his head slightly. Until tomorrow. After Dumbledore departed, escorted by goblin guards to ensure he left the bank, Harry let out a long, shaky breath. The others quickly rejoined him. That was both foolish and impressive, Augusta Longbottom declared, her tone making it unclear which quality she found more prominent. Amelia Bones looked troubled. He attempted a memory charm on a child. That's grounds for investigation at minimum. And yet proving it would be nearly impossible, Harry noted. His word against mine, and he has decades of political capital to draw upon. Nevertheless, we have witnesses to his admission of managing your finances against the terms of the will, Hermione pointed out. That alone strengthens tomorrow's case. Harry nodded, but his mind was already moving forward. Confronting Dumbledore had been necessary but was only one step in a much larger strategy. The real battle would come tomorrow in the Wizengamot, where centuries of political entrenchment protected the status quo. We should rest, he suggested, noting how tired Neville looked. Tomorrow will be challenging for all of us. As the others filed out, Griphook remained behind. The headmaster's attempt to mentally influence you changes matters, the goblin said gravely. Gringotts must now consider him a direct threat to a valued client. Harry understood the significance of this. Goblin neutrality was legendary, for them to classify Dumbledore as a threat represented a seismic shift in wizarding politics. What does that mean practically? It means, Griphook replied with a predatory smile, that we can now implement the more aggressive financial strategies we discussed. The complete audit of all Hogwarts accounts can begin immediately, including those under Dumbledore's personal control. And the Ministry accounts tied to Potter investments? Already underway. By morning, we'll have a complete picture of exactly where your family's gold has gone over the past 7 years. Griphook hesitated, then added, there is also the matter of the accelerated loan repayments. The deadline expires at midnight tomorrow. The Ministry has made no arrangements to cover their obligations. Harry considered this. The loans had been his strongest leverage, millions of galleons lent to various Ministry departments using Potter collateral, all without proper authorization. Demanding immediate repayment would bankrupt several critical government functions overnight. Hold the deadline firm, he decided. But prepare alternative repayment proposals for departments not directly implicated in the theft. The Department of Magical Catastrophes, for instance, shouldn't suffer for Fudge's corruption. Griphook nodded. A measured approach. The director will approve. That night, Harry slept fitfully in his Gringotts quarters. His confrontation with Dumbledore played through his dreams, except in the nightmares, the family magic didn't protect him. He woke shortly before dawn, a half-remembered spell echoing in his mind. He found Hermione already awake in their shared study space, surrounded by legal references and drinking tea that smelled of mint and something herbal. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, pushing a cup toward him. Harry accepted it gratefully. Dreams. Not pleasant ones. Understandable. You faced down possibly the most powerful wizard in Britain yesterday. And today we face the entire government, Harry added with a wry smile. Just another day in the life of an 8-year-old revolutionary. Hermione didn't return his smile. Harry, are you sure about all this? Not the justice of it, I know we're right about that. But the scale of what we're doing. Financially destabilizing the Ministry could have consequences beyond punishing those responsible. Harry had been asking himself the same question for months. The moral weight of his actions had grown heavier as their strategy expanded beyond simply reclaiming his stolen inheritance to potentially reshaping Wizarding Britain's governmental structure. I've thought about that, he admitted. A lot. But consider the alternative, allowing systemic corruption to continue unchallenged. How many other orphans have had their inheritances plundered? How many magical children are placed with inappropriate guardians because someone in power decides their fate with no oversight? He set down his teacup. This isn't just about me anymore, Hermione. It's about forcing accountability on institutions that have operated without it for centuries. Before she could respond, a tapping came at the window. A severe-looking ministry owl waited outside, a formal scroll attached to its leg. Harry retrieved and unrolled it. Minister Fudge requests a private meeting before the Wizengamot session, he read aloud. Hermione frowned. That's obviously a trap. Obviously, Harry agreed. Which is why we'll meet him at the ministry atrium, with Madame Bones present, 30 minutes before the session. He quickly penned a response, emphasizing these conditions as non-negotiable. As the owl departed, Griphook entered with a thick folder. The audit results, the goblin announced. You'll want to review these before facing the Wizengamot. The documents revealed a pattern more disturbing than even their worst suspicions. Beyond the direct withdrawals from Potter vaults, Dumbledore had used Harry's inheritance as collateral for dozens of ministry initiatives, from expanded Auror funding to international magical cooperation programs. On paper, these appeared benevolent, but deeper examination revealed significant portions disappearing into untraceable channels. More damning were the personal accounts. Cornelius Fudge had received consulting fees from several programs backed by Potter Gold. The Undersecretary, Dolores Umbridge, had similarly benefited from discretionary funds supposedly earmarked for magical orphans' welfare. It's not just theft, Hermione observed, looking increasingly outraged as she read. It's a complete subversion of government responsibility. They've been running departments on stolen money rather than proper taxation and budgeting. Harry nodded grimly. Because proper taxation would require accountability to taxpayers. This way, they spend freely without oversight. He closed the folder. Time to change that. 3 hours later, Harry stood in the ministry atrium beside Amelia Bones, watching ministry employees hurry to their departments with worried expressions. News of the financial audit had spread, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Minister Fudge appeared flanked by Percy Weasley, who carried an overflowing portfolio, and a toad-like woman in a pink cardigan whom Harry recognized from the financial records as Umbridge. Mr. Potter, Fudge began with forced joviality. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I'm sure we can clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding before the formal session. There's no misunderstanding, Minister, Harry replied evenly. Your government has been systematically misappropriating funds from my family vaults for 7 years. The documentation is conclusive. Fudge's smile faltered. Now see here, young man. These are complex financial arrangements established for the greater good of Wizarding Britain. Surely you don't want to be responsible for crippling vital government services? I'm not responsible for that, Minister. You are. Harry maintained steady eye contact. You authorized expenditures without proper funding sources. You accepted personal payments from programs supposedly benefiting orphan children. Umbridge stepped forward, her voice sickeningly sweet. Perhaps Mr. Potter doesn't understand governmental necessities, being just a child. These special arrangements were approved by his magical guardian, Albus Dumbledore. Who had no legal right to make such arrangements, Amelia Bones interjected. The Potter will explicitly limited guardianship powers regarding the estate. Madam Umbridge, I suggest you review your own department's involvement before the session. The misappropriation from the Magical Orphans Welfare Fund falls directly under your purview. Umbridge's face darkened with ugly splotches. Are you threatening me, Amelia? Merely stating facts that will become public record in approximately, she checked her watch, 27 minutes. Fudge dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. Mr. Potter, surely we can reach some arrangement. The ministry is prepared to offer full recognition of your status, perhaps a formal apology, and the immediate return of all misappropriated funds with standard interest?" Harry asked. The minister blanched. That's impossible. The amounts involved would bankrupt several departments overnight. Then perhaps those departments should have considered that before spending money that wasn't theirs. Harry glanced at his own watch. "I believe our meeting time has elapsed, Minister. I'll see you in the chamber." As they walked away, Amelia spoke quietly. "Fudge will be desperate now. Expect him to attempt to discredit you during the session." "Let him try," Harry replied. "The evidence speaks for itself." The Wisengamot chamber impressed despite Harry's preparation. Tiered seating rose in a semicircle around a central speaking floor, with the chief warlock's podium positioned to overlook proceedings. Witches and wizards in plum-colored robes filled the seats, their conversations creating a buzz of anticipation that fell to curious whispers as Harry entered with his entourage. Augusta Longbottom guided them to the ancient houses section, where seats had been reserved for Harry and his legal representatives, a team of goblin lawyers in formal attire, an unprecedented sight in the Wisengamot. Hermione sat with the Grangers in the public gallery, which was unusually full for a financial inquiry session. Dumbledore entered last, taking his position as chief warlock with practiced dignity. If he felt any discomfort presiding over proceedings that implicated him directly, his serene expression revealed nothing. "Honored members of the Wisengamot," he began, his voice magically amplified. "We convene today to address financial irregularities brought to our attention by the Potter estate. As the matters involve actions taken during my tenure as young Mr. Potter's magical guardian, I have been advised to recuse myself from presiding over this session." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. This was an unexpected concession, one that suggested Dumbledore had assessed his position and found it weaker than anticipated. "Madam Marchbanks, as senior member, will preside instead," Dumbledore continued, yielding the podium to an ancient witch with a stern expression and quick, intelligent eyes. "The Wisengamot recognizes Heir Potter," Marchbanks announced once settled. "You may present your case." Harry approached the speaking floor, conscious of every eye upon him. The formal robes felt heavy on his shoulders, but the weight of his family rings provided strange comfort, a connection to generations of Potters who had stood in this chamber before him. "Honored Wisengamot," he began, his young voice clear and steady. "I come before you not merely as an individual seeking redress, but as representative of a principle fundamental to our society, that no one, regardless of position or power, should be above accountability." For the next 20 minutes, Harry methodically presented evidence of financial misappropriation from the Potter vaults. The goblin lawyers distributed documentation to each Wisengamot member, while magical projections displayed key records above the speaking floor. These signatures, Harry concluded, highlighting Dumbledore's elaborate script on dozens of withdrawal authorizations, represent not just a breach of fiduciary duty, but a betrayal of the trust my parents placed in this government to protect their orphan son. The chamber had grown increasingly quiet as the evidence mounted. Even Dumbledore's staunchest allies looked troubled by the sheer scale of the misappropriation, nearly 60% of the Potter fortune diverted to ministry programs without proper authorization. Furthermore, Harry continued, investigation reveals this pattern extends beyond my family. The accounts of at least 7 other orphaned heirs show similar unauthorized withdrawals, all bearing the signatures of either Albus Dumbledore as Chief Warlock or Minister Fudge under emergency powers provisions. Augusta Longbottom rose at this point. The Longbottom estate has experienced identical irregularities regarding my son and daughter-in-law's personal vaults, despite my position as regent for their son, Neville. I have provided corroborating documentation to support Heir Potter's claims. Before the chamber could fully process this, Minister Fudge surged to his feet. This is absurd. These children cannot possibly understand the complexities of governmental financing. These arrangements were completely legal under the Magical Emergency Provisions Act of 1982, which specifically excluded hereditary vaults from appropriation, Minister Amelia Bones pointed out calmly. Section 4, Paragraph 7 states unequivocally that, no emergency powers shall extend to the hereditary assets of ancient houses without two-thirds Wisengamot approval. No such approval was ever sought or granted. Fudge's face purpled. The boy is being manipulated by those who wish to destabilize our government. Just look at him, 8 years old and allegedly orchestrating complex legal challenges. Preposterous. Someone is using him as a puppet. Harry had anticipated this line of attack. I would be happy to submit to age-appropriate competency testing under Wisengamot supervision, Minister. Would you be willing to submit to financial ethics review under the same conditions? Titters of laughter rippled through the chamber. Fudge spluttered incoherently while Dumbledore finally rose to speak. If I may, he said gently, perhaps we are approaching this matter too adversarially. Young Harry has raised legitimate concerns that deserve consideration. I freely acknowledge that decisions were made regarding the Potter estate that, in retrospect, should have involved greater transparency. The strategic retreat was masterful, acknowledging enough fault to appear reasonable while admitting no actual wrongdoing. Harry recognized the political maneuvering for what it was. Transparency would have been appropriate, Harry agreed. But we are beyond matters of simple disclosure. The documentation proves systematic diversion of hereditary assets without legal authority. The Wisengamot must now determine appropriate remedies. Marchbanks nodded gravely. The evidence presented warrants formal inquiry. I hereby establish an investigative committee to examine these financial irregularities in detail. She named 7 Wisengamot members known for relative neutrality. This committee will report findings within 30 days. Harry had expected this procedural delay, but he had one more card to play. Madam Marchbanks, while the committee conducts its investigation, there remains the matter of outstanding loans. Gringotts has issued formal notice that all loans secured by Potter assets without proper authorization must be repaid by midnight tonight. A wave of shocked murmurs swept the chamber. Fudge looked apoplectic. That would bankrupt half the ministry departments, he shouted. Perhaps you should have considered that before spending money that wasn't yours, Harry replied, echoing his earlier comment. However, I am prepared to offer alternative arrangements for departments not directly implicated in the misappropriation, provided the principal actors accept personal responsibility. The implication was clear: Fudge, Dumbledore, and others directly involved would face financial consequences, while essential government functions could be preserved. Marchbanks studied Harry thoughtfully. A reasonable proposal, Heir Potter. The committee will address loan restructuring as its first priority. She turned to the chamber at large. This session is adjourned until the committee's preliminary report. As the Wisengamot members filed out, many casting thoughtful or calculating glances toward Harry, he rejoined his supporters in the Ancient Houses section. Augusta Longbottom nodded approvingly. Masterfully handled, Mr. Potter. You've given them enough rope to hang themselves without appearing vindictive. Amelia Bones looked less satisfied. Committee investigations can be influenced. Fudge will attempt to stack the deck. Which is why we have contingency plans, Harry assured her. The deadline stands regardless of the committee's deliberations. As they gathered their materials, Harry noticed Dumbledore watching him from across the chamber, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before the old wizard turned away, deep in conversation with several allies. He's planning something, Hermione observed, joining them from the gallery. That went too easily. Harry agreed. Dumbledore had yielded the chief warlock position without significant resistance and offered only token defense of his actions, both uncharacteristic concessions from a man known for controlling every situation. Be vigilant, he told his companions. This was just the opening move. Their suspicions proved justified that very afternoon. As Harry and his team reviewed the morning's proceedings at Gringotts, an urgent message arrived from Amelia Bones. Fudge has convened an emergency session of the International Magical Cooperation Committee, she reported via secure Fluke call. They're drafting regulations to restrict goblin banking autonomy, specifically targeting loan enforcement procedures. Grip Hook, who had been listening nearby, hissed something in gobbledygook that needed no translation. A direct attack on Gringotts' sovereignty. The director must be informed immediately. Within an hour, the bank had shifted to emergency protocols. Goblin guards in full battle armor appeared at every entrance, while regular banking operations continued with deliberate normalcy. Deep beneath the marble halls, however, Gringotts prepared for conflict. The ministry cannot legally restrict our operations without full Wizengamot approval, Ragnarok declared in an emergency council that included Harry, Hermione, and their key allies. But Fudge appears beyond caring about legality at this point. He's desperate, Augusta Longbottom observed. The committee members are reviewing documentation that implicates him personally in embezzlement. If he doesn't regain control of the narrative by tonight's deadline, his career is finished. What's his most likely move? Harry asked practically. Amelia looked grim. Based on intelligence from my Aurors, Fudge has authorized Department of Magical Law Enforcement action against Gringotts if the loan deadline isn't extended. He's claiming financial terrorism against the government. He wouldn't dare, Augusta breathed. An armed action against Gringotts would violate the Treaty of 1612. It could trigger another goblin rebellion. Perhaps that's what he wants, Harry suggested. A security crisis would override financial concerns, potentially allowing emergency powers to seize assets for the greater good, the same justification Dumbledore used. Ragnarok's sharp teeth gleamed in what might have been admiration. You think like a goblin, young Potter. Creating a crisis to exploit it is indeed a human specialty. He turned to his subordinates. Prepare the deep vaults for lockdown. If Aurors breach our doors, all wizard gold transfers to the Paris branch automatically. That would cause financial panic, Hermione noted. Precisely, Ragnarok agreed. Let wizards see the consequence of threatening Gringotts. As evening approached, tension mounted throughout Diagon Alley. Word had spread of potential ministry action against the bank, causing concerned citizens to queue for emergency withdrawals. Gringotts honored all requests with pointed efficiency, demonstrating both their liquidity and commitment to client service even under threat. At 7 o'clock, Amelia Bones arrived with troubling news. Fudge has mobilized a special aura unit under Umbridge's direct command, bypassing normal DMLE authority. They have orders to enter Gringotts at 9 o'clock and secure financial records pertinent to national security unless the loan deadline is extended. A pretext for seizing evidence against them, Harry concluded. How many Aurors? 20. Some of our more politically malleable personnel. Harry turned to Ragnarok. What's your assessment if they attempt entry? The Goblin director's expression darkened. Gringotts will defend its sovereignty. Blood will be spilled, not our preference, but we will not yield. The implications hung heavily in the air. Wizarding-goblin relations had been peaceful, if not warm, for centuries. Armed conflict between ministry forces and Gringotts would shatter that peace with unpredictable consequences. Harry paced the conference room, thinking rapidly. There must be a third option between capitulation and violence. Hermione leaned forward. What about public exposure? If people knew Aurors were preparing to raid Gringotts over the minister's personal corruption. The Prophet won't publish anything against ministry interests, Augusta pointed out. Fudge controls their licensing. But the Quibbler might, Hermione countered. They're independent and reach a different audience. Harry nodded slowly, an idea forming. We need more than just exposure. We need a public demonstration that makes violence impossible without revealing Fudge's true motives. He turned to Ragnarok. With your permission, Director, I'd like to make an appearance at the bank entrance when the Aurors arrive. The goblin studied him curiously. To what purpose? To change the narrative. If the boy who lived stands with Gringotts, it creates a very different political equation. Understanding dawned in Ragnarok's eyes. You would publicly align yourself with the Goblin Nation. I would publicly align myself with justice and financial accountability, Harry clarified. Principles that should matter to all magical beings. As plans developed, Hermione dispatched a detailed account of the developing situation to her father, who had cultivated a relationship with Xenophilius Lovegood, the Quibbler's eccentric editor. Meanwhile, Augusta Longbottom activated her considerable social network, ensuring that concerned citizens, particularly those from influential families, would witness the coming confrontation. By 8:30, a crowd had gathered in Diagon Alley. Word of the impending Auror action had spread, drawing curious onlookers and concerned account holders. The Quibbler special edition circulated through the crowd, its headline blaring, "Ministry Corruption Exposed, Fudge Raids Gringotts to Hide Financial Crimes." At precisely 9 o'clock, a squad of Aurors in formal crimson robes appeared at the head of the alley, led by Dolores Umbridge in a pink coat that made her resemble an overgrown flamingo. They marched purposefully toward the bank, only to stop short at the sight that greeted them. On the marble steps of Gringotts stood Harry Potter, his formal robes bearing the Potter crest, the heir ring visible on his hand. Beside him stood goblin guards at attention, presenting not a hostile force but a dignified honor guard. Behind them, the bank's doors remained open, business continuing as usual. A murmur ran through the crowd. The boy who lived, whose return to the wizarding world had been reported in mysterious terms, now stood publicly before them for the first time. Umbridge recovered first. "Step aside, boy. This is official ministry business." Harry's voice, magically amplified to carry across the alley, remained calm. "Good evening, Madam Umbridge. May I inquire as to the nature of this official business that requires armed Aurors after banking hours?" The crowd's attention focused on Umbridge, whose simpering smile twisted unpleasantly. "The ministry is conducting a security operation. Details are classified. Now remove yourself from ministry affairs before you find yourself in serious trouble." Harry didn't move. "I find myself concerned that ministry affairs seem to include armed aggression against the financial institution that has safeguarded wizarding gold for centuries. Especially when that institution is currently investigating financial irregularities involving the minister himself." Gasps and murmurs spread through the onlookers. Umbridge's face flushed an ugly shade of puce. "How dare you spread such lies? The minister has authorized this action under Emergency Security Provision 13, which grants him authority to secure financial records relating to threats against magical Britain." "Interesting," Harry replied. "Because I have here," he held up a document, "the original loan agreements bearing Minister Fudge's signature, authorizing personal payments to himself from funds secured by my family's assets without proper authorization. Is that the security threat you're concerned about?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Several influential Wizengamot members who had arrived at Augusta's discreet suggestion exchanged troubled glances. Umbridge squared her shoulders. "Aurors, secure the bank entrance and detain anyone who interferes with ministry operations." As the Aurors hesitantly advanced, Harry raised his hand. The heir ring gleamed in the evening light. "As heir to House Potter, whose gold comprises nearly 20% of Gringotts' holdings, I invoke the right of sanctuary under the Treaty of 1612. His voice rang with formal authority beyond his years. "Any attack on this bank constitutes an attack on my house and its interests." Magic swirled visibly around him, the Potter family magic responding to his declaration. A golden glow emanated from the bank's entrance, spreading outward to form a shimmering barrier. The lead Auror halted, looking uncertainly at Umbridge. "Ma'am, he's invoked formal house protection. We'd be violating at least 3 treaty provisions if we proceed." "Nonsense!" Umbridge snapped. "He's a child. He cannot invoke ancient magic." "Yet it appears he just did," came a new voice. Amelia Bones stepped from the crowd, her DMLE badge prominently displayed. "And as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, I am ordering this unauthorized operation to stand down immediately." Umbridge's eyes bulged. "You have no authority. The minister himself has no legal right to deploy Aurors against Gringotts without full Wizengamot approval," Amelia finished firmly. "Aurors, return to the ministry. Those who proceed will face departmental review for treaty violations. The Aurors looked between Umbridge and Bones, clearly torn between conflicting authorities. The crowd watched in tense silence, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Harry spoke again, his voice carrying clearly. This doesn't have to end in conflict. I've authorized Gringotts to offer reasonable repayment terms for all departments not directly implicated in the misappropriation. Essential services can continue uninterrupted, provided those responsible for the corruption accept personal accountability. It was a public olive branch, one that positioned Harry as reasonable and concerned for the greater good, in stark contrast to Umbridge's belligerence. The crowd's mood shifted perceptibly. Whispers of approval spread. Several Wizengamot members stepped forward, formally identifying themselves and requesting immediate conference with both Gringotts representatives and ministry officials to resolve this unfortunate situation with appropriate dignity. Umbridge, suddenly aware of the political disaster unfolding, attempted to regain control. This matter will be addressed through proper channels. Aurors, withdraw for consultation. As the Aurors retreated, the crowd broke into spontaneous discussion. Reporters, not just from the Quibbler but several international publications, pressed forward, shouting questions at Harry. Mr. Potter, is it true the ministry stole from your vaults? Are you declaring a formal house dispute with the government? Why have you only now returned to Wizarding Society? Harry raised his hand for quiet, waiting until the clamor subsided. I didn't choose to be absent from Wizarding Society. Despite my parents' explicit wishes, I was placed with Muggle relatives who kept me ignorant of my heritage. Upon discovering the truth 6 months ago, I've worked to understand what happened to my family's legacy and why those entrusted with my welfare made the choices they did. He gestured to the bank behind him. What began as a personal quest for answers revealed systemic problems that affect many orphaned magical children. This isn't about one boy's inheritance, it's about a government that has operated without proper financial oversight for too long. A reporter pushed forward. Are you saying Albus Dumbledore and Minister Fudge deliberately stole from orphans? Harry chose his words carefully. I'm saying documentation exists showing unauthorized withdrawals bearing their signatures. Whether those actions were malicious or merely negligent will be determined through proper investigation. All I seek is accountability and reform to prevent such situations in the future. The measured response impressed even Augusta Longbottom, who had joined Harry on the steps. Well handled, she murmured. Neither vindictive nor weak. As the crowd gradually dispersed, the immediate crisis averted, Harry felt both exhaustion and exhilaration. The confrontation had been a calculated risk, but one that had shifted the narrative decisively. No longer was this a private financial dispute, it was now a public matter of government accountability with the boy who lived as its symbolic center. Inside the bank, Griphook greeted him with a rare goblin gesture of respect, a closed fist pressed to the chest. The director extends his personal appreciation, Herr Potter. Your actions tonight have prevented bloodshed while preserving Gringotts' honor. The fight isn't over, Harry cautioned. Fudge and Dumbledore will regroup. Of course, the goblin agreed. But they must now do so under public scrutiny, with their credibility damaged. Meanwhile, the midnight deadline approaches, and no payment has been arranged. Implement the graduated response we discussed, Harry instructed. Freeze personal accounts of those directly implicated, but extend conditional grace periods for essential services. Later that evening, as Harry reviewed the day's events with Hermione in their Gringotts quarters, an unexpected visitor arrived, Amelia Bones, looking troubled. Dumbledore has resigned as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, she announced without preamble. He claims he needs to focus on domestic matters during this challenging time. Harry and Hermione exchanged concerned glances. That's not a retreat, Hermione said slowly. It's a redeployment. Precisely, Amelia agreed. He's consolidating his attention on the Wizengamot and Hogwarts, the two power bases he'll need to weather this storm. And Fudge? Harry asked. calling in every political favor he's accumulated in 15 years of glad-handing. The Prophet's evening edition is already spinning tonight's events as a misunderstanding and praising the minister's restraint in a complex situation. Harry nodded thoughtfully. They're adapting faster than expected. We need to maintain momentum. He turned to Hermione. The Longbottom files, are they ready? She nodded. Augusta completed her review this afternoon. The pattern of misappropriation matches yours almost exactly. Good. Tomorrow we expand the narrative beyond just my case. Harry's expression hardened with determination. Let's see how Fudge explains systematic theft from multiple orphaned heirs of ancient houses. As midnight approached, bringing with it the loan deadline, Harry stood in Ragnarok's office watching a magical ledger update in real time. One by one, loan accounts shifted to default status, triggering automatic asset freezes across dozens of ministry departments. It is done, Ragnarok declared solemnly. For the first time since 1734, the Ministry of Magic stands in formal default to Gringotts. What happens now? Harry asked, watching the magical indicators on the ledger continue to shift. By morning, international magical financial markets will respond. The ministry's credit rating will collapse. Their ability to conduct financial transactions beyond Britain will be severely constrained. The Goblin director fixed Harry with a penetrating look. You have set in motion changes that cannot be easily undone, young heir. Are you prepared for the consequences? Harry considered the question honestly. What had begun as a child's quest for justice had evolved into something far larger, a fundamental challenge to power structures that had operated unchecked for generations. There would be backlash, certainly. Powerful people rarely surrendered privilege without fight. I believe some changes are worth the cost, he answered finally. My parents died protecting me. I won't dishonor their sacrifice by allowing their murderers' enemies to profit from their deaths. The next morning brought the expected chaos. The Daily Prophet's headline screamed, Financial Crisis Rocks Ministry as Potter Heir Demands Millions. The article painted Harry as a vindictive child manipulated by goblins and foreign interests seeking to destabilize British magical government. Barely an hour after the paper's delivery, a formal delegation arrived at Gringotts, not Aurors this time, but senior Wizengamot members led by Dumbledore himself, who had evidently decided direct involvement was now necessary. We request a formal negotiation session with Heir Potter and Gringotts representatives, the former Supreme Mugwump stated with dignified urgency. The current situation threatens essential government functions that protect all magical citizens. The meeting convened in Gringotts' largest conference chamber, with Harry flanked by Goblin financial experts, Augusta Longbottom, and Amelia Bones. Across the table, Dumbledore led a delegation including select Wizengamot members, noticeably excluding Fudge or his closest allies. Thank you for agreeing to this discussion, Dumbledore began, his manner grave. The financial measures implemented at midnight have already begun affecting critical ministry functions, including Auror patrols and magical catastrophe response teams. Exactly as outlined in our graduated impact assessment, Harry replied calmly, which we provided to the Wizengamot committee yesterday. Essential security functions remain funded for 30 days, giving ample time for responsible resolution. A gray-haired witch named Griselda Marchbanks nodded approvingly. The boy has done his homework, Albus. His team provided more detailed financial analysis than the ministry's own budget office. Dumbledore acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. Nevertheless, longer-term stability requires a more permanent solution than 30-day extensions. The Wizengamot is prepared to establish an independent commission with full investigatory powers to examine all financial irregularities since 1981. While allowing those responsible to remain in power during the investigation. Harry asked skeptically. Administrative continuity is essential during transition, Dumbledore replied smoothly. However, I have personally suggested that Minister Fudge take a leave of absence pending the Commission's findings. This was a significant concession, one that suggested internal ministry politics had shifted overnight. Fudge was being offered as a sacrifice to protect the system itself. And your own role in these matters, Professor? Harry asked directly. Dumbledore met his gaze steadily. I have tendered my resignation as Chief Warlock, effective immediately. I retain my position at Hogwarts, where my responsibilities to the students remain my primary concern. Another strategic retreat, abandoning political power to preserve educational influence. Harry noted the pattern. Dumbledore consistently yielded formal titles while maintaining his most essential power base. The negotiations continued for hours, gradually establishing a framework for financial reorganization. The ministry would acknowledge misappropriation without specifying individual culpability. An independent commission would investigate all transactions. Frozen assets would be released gradually based on departmental compliance with new accountability measures. By late afternoon, a preliminary agreement had been drafted. The goblins, while maintaining a stern demeanor, seemed satisfied with provisions guaranteeing greater financial autonomy and recognition of their treaty rights. As the delegation prepared to depart, Dumbledore lingered behind. A moment of your time, Harry, if I may. Harry glanced at Augusta, who nodded almost imperceptibly. 5 minutes, Headmaster. When they were relatively private, Dumbledore's expression softened. You've accomplished remarkable things these past months. Your parents would be proud of your intelligence and determination. But not my methods. Harry guessed, noting the qualification in Dumbledore's tone. A faint smile touched the old wizard's lips. James was never one to respect authority for its own sake. And Lily, well, she could be formidable when confronting injustice. His expression grew more serious. But there are larger considerations at play that you cannot yet fully comprehend. Voldemort, Harry said bluntly. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. You are remarkably well informed. I've accessed the Hall of Prophecy records. I know why he targeted my family. Then you understand why certain precautions were necessary, even if their implementation was flawed. Harry studied the man who had shaped his destiny so profoundly. What I understand is that you made choices that weren't yours to make. You decided my parents' wishes for my upbringing were less important than your strategic plans. I did what I believed necessary for the greater good, Dumbledore admitted. Perhaps with too little consideration for your individual welfare. That was an error in judgment I now regret. It was the closest thing to a genuine apology Harry had heard from the headmaster. Yet you still believe you were right about Voldemort's return. I know I am. Dumbledore's certainty was absolute. The question now is whether we can move forward with a better understanding between us. You will attend Hogwarts in a few years. I would prefer we do so not as adversaries. Harry considered this carefully. His goal had never been permanent enmity with Dumbledore. The wizard was too powerful, too influential to maintain as a dedicated enemy. Yet trust, once broken, couldn't be quickly restored. I'm willing to establish a working relationship, Harry said finally. But it must be based on transparency and respect, not manipulation and control. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Fair terms. Perhaps we can begin with more direct communication regarding your educational preparation. Your magical development appears exceptional for your age. Removing the suppression charms helped, Harry noted pointedly. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Dumbledore's face. Suppression charms. Found and removed by the Gringotts Cursebreakers. Placed when I was approximately 15 months old, keyed to your magical signature. Dumbledore looked genuinely troubled. I authorized no such charms. A monitoring ward, yes, but never suppression. This requires investigation. For the first time, Harry considered that perhaps not all the manipulations he'd suffered had been Dumbledore's direct doing. The implications were disturbing, suggesting either the headmaster had less control over his subordinates than believed, or someone else had interfered with Harry's life. Before they could pursue this revelation further, Griphook appeared with urgent news. Potter, we have a situation developing at the Ministry. Fudge is refusing to step aside and has barricaded himself in the minister's office with several supporters. Dumbledore's expression darkened. Cornelius never did accept reality gracefully. Harry exchanged a glance with the headmaster, a moment of unexpected alignment. It seems our negotiations may have been premature. Indeed. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after the immediate crisis is resolved. Dumbledore straightened, once again the powerful wizard rather than the conciliatory elder. With your permission, I'll join Amelia in addressing the situation. After Dumbledore departed, Hermione found Harry still standing in the conference room, deep in thought. What did he want? She asked suspiciously. To establish a truce, I think. And to suggest that someone else might have placed suppression charms on me as a baby. Hermione's brow furrowed. Do you believe him? I'm not sure. Harry rubbed his scar absently. But it raises questions worth investigating. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Augusta Longbottom with Neville in tow. Fudge is making his last stand, she reported grimly. He's claiming foreign interference in domestic affairs and accusing the goblins of financial terrorism. Desperate rhetoric, Harry observed. Is anyone supporting him? Umbridge, naturally. A few department heads who benefited most directly from the misappropriation. But most of the ministry staff have simply gone home, awaiting resolution. Harry nodded thoughtfully. Meaning the government is effectively paralyzed until this ends. Precisely. Augusta's expression was grim. Britain hasn't faced a ministerial succession crisis since 1832. As they discussed implications, Neville hesitantly spoke up. What about all the students meant to start Hogwarts soon? Will this affect school operations? It was a practical question that highlighted the real-world impact beyond political maneuvering. Harry realized that their actions, however justified, were creating ripple effects throughout magical Britain. Hogwarts operates independently of ministry funding, Hermione reassured Neville. Though I suppose the Board of Governors might become involved if the situation deteriorates further. Harry made a mental note to ensure educational institutions remained insulated from the financial fallout. Children shouldn't suffer for adult corruption, he knew that truth all too well. By evening, news arrived that Fudge had finally surrendered his position after Aurors loyal to Amelia Bones secured the ministry. Wizengamot elders had appointed Tiberius Ogden as interim minister until proper elections could be held, a neutral choice acceptable to both progressive and traditional factions. A significant victory, Griphook acknowledged when they reconvened to assess developments. Though I caution against celebrating prematurely. The system that enabled such corruption remains largely intact. Harry agreed. This was never about replacing one minister with another. It's about structural reform. Which typically happens very slowly in wizarding society, Augusta noted with the wisdom of experience. You've created momentum for change, Mr. Potter, but sustaining it will require persistent pressure. The following days brought intensive negotiations between Gringotts, the interim ministry leadership, and representatives from the ancient houses. Harry, despite his youth, participated fully, his status as catalyst for the crisis granting him influence beyond his years. A week later, the Wizengamot passed the Magical Financial Accountability Act, legislation establishing independent oversight for ministry budgeting and prohibiting unauthorized use of hereditary assets. While far from perfect, it represented the first meaningful reform to wizarding financial governance in centuries. More personally significant for Harry was the resolution of his guardianship situation. With Dumbledore's magical guardianship invalidated by documented negligence, Harry had technically become a ward of the ministry, an obviously problematic arrangement given the circumstances. The solution emerged from an unexpected quarter. Amelia Bones, whose reputation for integrity had only been enhanced by recent events, petitioned for temporary guardianship until more permanent arrangements could be established. You need a guardian without political entanglements to Dumbledore or the former ministry administration, she explained during a private meeting at Gringotts. My position as DMLE head provides security resources for your protection, while my seat on the Wisengamot ensures your political interests aren't ignored. Harry considered the proposal carefully. And my current living arrangements need not change immediately. The Goblin Sanctuary provision remains legally valid, and I would simply be your guardian on record for educational and legal matters. Amelia's expression softened slightly. My niece Susan is about your age. Perhaps you might visit occasionally to maintain appearances of a normal guardianship. The arrangement seemed reasonable, a pragmatic solution that protected Harry's independence while satisfying legal requirements. Within days, the paperwork was finalized, making Amelia Bones his official guardian in magical society. With this matter settled, Harry turned his attention to longer-term considerations. His eventual attendance at Hogwarts would place him directly in Dumbledore's sphere of influence, a situation requiring careful preparation. We should accelerate your magical education, Hermione suggested during one of their planning sessions. Not just theory but practical skills. Difficult without wands, Harry pointed out. We won't be allowed those until 11. Actually, Griphook interjected, there are certain loopholes regarding air training. The underage magic restriction specifically exempts formal air preparation under recognized tutors. This revelation opened new possibilities. With Amelia's approval as his guardian, Harry could begin structured magical training years before his Hogwarts letter arrived. Augusta Longbottom offered to include him in Neville's tutoring sessions, while the Grangers arranged for Hermione to join as well, her status as a first generation which qualifying her for specialized educational accommodations. By spring, Harry had established a new normal, dividing his time between Gringotts, where he continued overseeing the restoration of his family's assets, and Longbottom Manor, where he, Neville, and Hermione received instruction from tutors in basic magical theory and control. His first successful intentional spell, a simple Lumos performed with a training wand, filled him with an indescribable joy. This was his birthright, the legacy his parents had died protecting. Every new skill mastered felt like a connection to them, a fulfillment of what they would have wanted for him. Politically, the interim ministry continued implementing reforms, though progress often seemed frustratingly slow. Dumbledore, while diminished in formal authority, remained influential through his extensive network of former students and allies. The Daily Prophet gradually shifted its coverage, acknowledging unfortunate financial irregularities under the Fudge administration without directly implicating Dumbledore. Public opinion is fickle, Augusta warned during one of their regular strategy sessions. Already people begin to forget the severity of what occurred. They see only the disruption to familiar patterns. Then we must provide regular reminders, Harry decided. Not vindicatively, but factually. Perhaps through educational initiatives about financial responsibility and governance. This approach, constructive rather than punitive, helped maintain public support while advancing substantive reforms. By funding scholarships for orphaned magical children and establishing a foundation for improving magical orphanage conditions, Harry transformed what might have been merely a political victory into lasting institutional change. Not everyone appreciated these efforts. Dolores Umbridge, demoted but still employed within the ministry, circulated whispers about the Potter boy's inappropriate influence and goblin manipulation of a vulnerable child. These insinuations gained little traction but signaled continued resistance from elements of the old guard. More concerning were reports from Amelia about increased activity among known sympathizers of Voldemort. Nothing concrete, she clarified during a secure briefing at her home. But movement of funds, quiet meetings, old connections being re-established. Something is stirring. This aligned with Dumbledore's warnings about Voldemort's eventual return. Despite their complicated relationship, Harry took these warnings seriously, incorporating defensive magic into his studies with particular focus. By summer, nearly a year after his discovery of the Potter Vault Trust Box, Harry had achieved more than he'd initially imagined possible. The ministry operated under new financial oversight. His family's remaining assets were secure. He had established a home base with appropriate magical protections. Most importantly, he had found something he'd never had at the Dursleys, people who genuinely cared about his welfare. You seem pensive today, Hermione observed one afternoon as they practiced basic potion preparations in the Longbottom greenhouse. Harry looked up from carefully chopping dandelion roots. Just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Sometimes I still expect to wake up in that cupboard. Hermione's expression softened. But you won't. Ever again. Thanks to you, Harry acknowledged. I couldn't have done any of this without your help that first day in the library. She flushed slightly. You'd have figured it out eventually. You're remarkably stubborn. A trait we share, he teased, earning a mock-indignant huff. Their easy camaraderie was interrupted by Neville rushing into the greenhouse, face flushed with excitement. Harry. Hermione. You won't believe what's happening. What is it? They asked in unison. The Wisengamot just approved the Air Protection Act. Gran says it's passed with a veto-proof majority. This was momentous news. The legislation, inspired by Harry's case but expanded to protect all magical orphans, established strict oversight of heritage assets and required regular accounting of all guardian activities. Most importantly, it created a permanent review board with Goblin participation to monitor compliance. That's brilliant! Hermione exclaimed. I thought the traditional faction would block it for sure. They tried, Neville explained, practically bouncing with excitement. But then Madame Marchbanks reminded everyone that even the oldest families are just one Dark Lord away from leaving orphaned heirs. That changed enough votes to get it through. Harry felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at the tangible reform, but also a bittersweet awareness that such protections had come too late for him and others like him. Still, future generations of magical orphans would benefit, which had always been his broader goal. That evening, Harry joined Augusta, Neville, Amelia, and the Grangers for a small celebration dinner at Longbottom Manor. As glasses of sparkling pumpkin juice were raised in a toast to the legislation's passage, Harry found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he'd been a lonely, undernourished boy cleaning an attic as punishment. The discovery of that magical trunk had set in motion events that transformed not just his life but potentially the course of wizarding governance. He'd faced down Dumbledore, confronted a corrupt ministry, and begun reclaiming his magical heritage. Yet Harry knew this was merely the beginning. Somewhere, according to both prophecy and Dumbledore's warnings, Voldemort awaited return. The wizarding world, for all its recent reforms, remained vulnerable to darker influences. His parents' murderer still threatened from the shadows. But unlike the helpless child who had once huddled in a cupboard under the stairs, Harry now had knowledge, resources, and most importantly, people who stood with him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them not alone but surrounded by allies united by principles of justice and truth. As the celebration continued around him, Harry quietly renewed his commitment to honoring his parents' sacrifice through creating the better world they had fought for, one where no child suffered as he had, where corruption faced accountability, and where justice prevailed over expediency. The road ahead might be difficult, but Harry Potter, heir to the noble and most ancient house of Potter, was ready to walk it. Chapter 3, The Ministry's fall morning light spilled across the polished mahogany desk in Harry's study at Longbottom Manor. Stacks of correspondence, legal documents, and financial reports covered nearly every inch of the surface. At the center lay the morning's Daily Prophet, its headline visible even from across the room, Ministry in turmoil, financial crisis deepens as more families come forward. Harry stood at the window, watching a pair of thrushes dart between the ancient oaks that bordered Augusta Longbottom's property. Just 8 days shy of his 8th birthday, he'd grown several inches in the past year. Proper nutrition, regular exercise, and freedom from the Dursleys' constant belittlement had transformed the once small, hunched boy into a child who stood straight-backed and clear-eyed. They're calling it the Great Reckoning now, Hermione said from the doorway, another newspaper in hand. She'd taken to spending 3 days a week at Longbottom Manor for their shared tutoring and planning sessions. The international press is less restrained than the Prophet. The American Magical Chronicle is comparing it to their 1929 stock market crash. Harry turned from the window. Exaggerated, but useful. International pressure makes it harder for the ministry to simply wait this out. 7 more families filed claims yesterday, Hermione continued, referencing a notebook she carried everywhere these days. That brings the total to 23 orphaned heirs with documented evidence of financial exploitation. Any patterns in the new cases? All similar to yours, guardianship assigned to individuals who then authorized emergency withdrawals for ministry programs. She hesitated. There's something else. Amelia found documents suggesting this practice predates the war. It's been happening for decades, just accelerated after Voldemort's fall. Harry absorbed this information silently. What they'd uncovered wasn't merely Dumbledore's poor judgment or Fudge's corruption, it was a systemic rot extending through generations of ministry governance. The implications were staggering. The door opened again as Neville entered, followed by Augusta. The Longbottom heir had changed almost as much as Harry over the past year. The new wand that had chosen him at Ollivanders had unleashed previously suppressed magical ability, and the confidence that came with successful spellcasting had begun reshaping his entire demeanor. The Wizengamot emergency session is confirmed for tomorrow morning, Augusta announced. Interim Minister Ogden tried to postpone, but with 5 ancient houses formally requesting proceedings, he had no choice. Who's opposing us? Harry asked. The usual suspects, Augusta replied. Traditionalists who fear change, departments whose budgets relied on misappropriated funds, and those personally implicated. She permitted herself a thin smile. But they're increasingly isolated. The evidence is simply too overwhelming to dismiss. Harry nodded. And Dumbledore? Still officially neutral, though his closest allies vote consistently against our proposals. Augusta's expression hardened slightly. He maintains a certain, strategic distance from direct involvement. Of course he does, Harry murmured. Despite their tentative truce, he harbored no illusions about the former Chief Warlock's ultimate priorities. Dumbledore protected systems he'd helped shape, regardless of their flaws. Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of Griphook via the specially authorized flow connection. The goblin looked uncharacteristically agitated, the leather portfolio under his arm bulging with documents. Heir Potter, he began without preamble, we have an urgent situation. Ministry officials attempted to access the sealed Potter vaults this morning using emergency authorization codes. Harry straightened immediately. Whose authorization? Undersecretary Umbridge, claiming financial security protocols. Griphook's sharp teeth gleamed in what might have been a smile. They were, of course, denied access and detained for questioning under Gringotts' sovereign rights. Hermione gasped. They actually tried to raid your vaults. That's beyond illegal, it's a treaty violation. Desperation, Augusta observed grimly. Tomorrow's Wizengamot session must have them truly frightened. Harry considered the implications. This is good news, actually. They wouldn't risk something so blatantly illegal unless they're panicking. He turned to Griphook. How many officials were involved? 4. 2 from the Department of Magical Treasury and 2 Aurors assigned to special duties. The goblin placed his portfolio on the desk, extracting several documents. They carried this warrant, allegedly signed by Interim Minister Ogden, though he has already contacted Gringotts denying any knowledge of the operation. Harry examined the document, noting the inconsistencies in the magical signature. A forgery. Clumsy work, too. Definitely Umbridge style, Hermione agreed, looking over his shoulder. She's never been subtle. Harry passed the forged warrant to Augusta. This changes our approach for tomorrow. We're no longer just presenting evidence of past misconduct, we're demonstrating active conspiracy. Augusta nodded grimly. I'll inform Amelia immediately. She'll want to question these officials before the ministry attempts to recall them. Too late, Griphook said with evident satisfaction. Under paragraph 7 of the Banking Treaty of 1612, anyone attempting unauthorized access to hereditary vaults remains under Goblin jurisdiction for 72 hours. Director Ragnarok has already denied 3 ministry requests for their release. Harry exchanged glances with Hermione, seeing his own concern reflected in her expression. The situation was escalating faster than anticipated. What had begun as a legal and financial challenge to corrupt practices was rapidly becoming a direct confrontation between Magical Britain's major institutions. We need to accelerate our plans, he decided. The full documentation package for all affected families must be ready for tomorrow's session, not just summaries, but complete audit trails. My team has worked through the night, Griphook assured him. The evidence is irrefutable and organized by family, date, and authorization signature. Harry nodded. Good. Neville, has your grandmother heard anything from the neutral families? Neville, who had been listening attentively, straightened at being addressed directly. The Greengrasses and Abbots have committed to supporting the inquiry. The Boneses were already with us. That should give us enough votes even if some traditionalists stand with the ministry. Assuming a fair vote, Hermione cautioned. That's why we need the international observers, Harry agreed. Augusta, did the ICW representatives confirm attendance? They arrive this evening. With Dumbledore no longer serving as Supreme Mugwump, the Confederation has taken a more active interest in our situation. The meeting continued for another hour, reviewing documents and refining strategy for the coming confrontation. As the others departed for their various tasks, Harry remained in the study, contemplating the document that had started everything, his parents' will, which now lay in a protected case on his desk. So much had changed since that hot summer day in the Dursleys' attic. The abandoned, ignorant child he'd been seemed like someone from another lifetime, a shadow he'd outgrown through necessity and determination. Yet he still felt his parents' absence like a physical ache, especially in quiet moments like this. Would they recognize the person he was becoming? Would they approve of his actions and the changes he'd set in motion? They would be proud, came a soft voice from the doorway. Harry turned to find Augusta Longbottom watching him with an expression softer than her usual stern countenance. Sometimes I forget how perceptive you are, Madame Longbottom. She entered the room fully, settling into an armchair with regal posture. I knew your parents well, Mr. Potter. Lily in particular had a fierce sense of justice that would have never tolerated what was done to you or the other children affected by these practices. And my father? A rare smile touched Augusta's lips. James Potter was capable of tremendous frivolity in his youth, but he grew into a man of principle. He and your mother stood against the Dark Lord when many others fled or compromised. They would recognize that same courage in you. Harry absorbed her words silently, grateful for this connection to parents he couldn't remember. There's something else you should know before tomorrow, Augusta continued, her expression growing serious again. Your relatives, the Dursleys, have been contacted by ministry officials. Harry's head snapped up. What? How? Apparently, Dolores Umbridge sent representatives to inform them of your activities in our world. Amelia's sources indicate they were offered financial compensation for information about your early childhood that might be used to discredit your testimony. Cold anger settled in Harry's stomach. And did they accept? According to surveillance, they were initially hesitant. But after learning of your access to the Potter fortune, Augusta left the implication hanging. Of course, Harry said flatly. Money has always been Vernon's primary motivation. This creates a complication. Your legal residence is still technically Privet Drive, despite your extended absence. If the Dursleys formally reject guardianship or make claims of abandonment, the ministry could attempt to establish emergency guardianship, Harry finished, mind racing through implications. That would potentially give them access to my vaults through legal channels rather than the crude break-in they attempted today. Augusta nodded grimly. Precisely. We need to address this vulnerability before tomorrow's session. Harry considered their options. His legal status had remained deliberately ambiguous during the past year, technically still the Dursleys' ward for Muggle purposes, while functioning under Amelia Bones's magical guardianship with Goblin Sanctuary protections. This arrangement had provided flexibility while permanent solutions were developed, but now threatened to become a liability. "We'll need to formalize my status immediately," he decided. "Not just magical guardianship, but complete legal emancipation in both worlds." Augusta raised an eyebrow. An ambitious goal for someone not yet 8 years old. "Age is becoming increasingly irrelevant given the circumstances," Harry pointed out. "I've already been recognized as a financially mature minor by international standards. With evidence of the Dursleys' neglect and the Ministry's attempt to manipulate them, we have grounds for emergency emancipation." "It would require expedited processing," Augusta mused. "Though perhaps Gringotts could assist, given their interest in protecting your assets." Harry nodded. "Have Griphook prepare the necessary documentation. We'll present it at tomorrow's session as a preemptive measure, before anyone can use my guardianship as leverage." As Augusta departed to make arrangements, Harry turned his attention to the final preparations for tomorrow's confrontation. The Wizengamot session would either cement the reforms they'd fought for or provide their opponents an opportunity to regain control of the narrative. Either way, Harry knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would never return to Privet Drive. Whatever happened next, his life with the Dursleys was finished. Dawn broke over London with threatening rain clouds that matched the mood at the Ministry of Magic. By 7:30, an unprecedented queue had formed outside the visitors' entrance, comprised of journalists, concerned citizens, and representatives from international magical bodies. Word had spread that today's emergency session would address the growing financial scandal that threatened to reshape magical Britain's governance. Harry arrived via a private fluke connection directly to Amelia Bones's office, accompanied by Hermione, the Longbottoms, and a goblin delegation led by Griphook. Amelia greeted them with characteristic efficiency, her monocle gleaming in the office's magical light. "The chamber's already half full," she reported. "International observers have been seated in the diplomatic section. Minister Ogden is attempting to maintain an appearance of normal procedure, but there's nothing normal about the atmosphere down there." Harry nodded, mentally reviewing their strategy once more. "Any unexpected developments?" "Dumbledore arrived early and has been in closed consultation with several Wizengamot elders. And the minister has requested a private word with you before the session." Harry exchanged glances with Hermione, whose expression mirrored his skepticism. "Here, with you present." Amelia nodded. "Those were my conditions for arranging it." "Then let's hear what he has to say." Tiberius Ogden, the interim minister, was a dignified wizard in his 70s whose traditional values were balanced by a pragmatic approach to governance. He entered Amelia's office with minimal ceremony, acknowledging each person with a respectful nod. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Herr Potter," he began, his voice carrying the cultured tones of magical Britain's upper class. "I hoped we might find common ground before today's proceedings take on a more adversarial nature." "I appreciate the gesture, Minister," Harry replied carefully. "What did you have in mind?" Ogden conjured a parchment from his robes. "A proposal for structured reform. The ministry acknowledges certain financial irregularities occurred under previous administrations and commits to full investigation with appropriate compensation to affected families." Harry accepted the document, scanning it quickly before passing it to Hermione for more thorough analysis. "This appears to address individual cases rather than systemic problems." "We must start somewhere," Ogden suggested reasonably. "Complete governmental restructuring cannot happen overnight without creating dangerous instability. The system has been stable for those benefiting from it," Harry observed, "and devastating for those exploited by it. Irregularities is a polite term for systematic theft from orphan children." Ogden sighed heavily. "I understand your perspective, Herr Potter. Truly, I do. But consider the broader implications of what you're pursuing. The international humiliation. The potential collapse of governmental functions. There must be a middle path that achieves justice without destroying institutions essential to our society's functioning." Harry studied the elderly wizard, recognizing the genuine concern behind his diplomatic language. Unlike Fudge or Umbridge, Ogden seemed motivated by institutional preservation rather than personal gain or power. "I appreciate your concern for stability, Minister," Harry said finally. "But the evidence we'll present today goes beyond individual malfeasance. It demonstrates institutional corruption spanning decades. Half measures won't address the root problems." Hermione handed the proposal back with a slight headshake, confirming Harry's assessment. Ogden accepted the parchment with resignation. "Then we proceed to full disclosure and whatever consequences follow. I only hope the foundations we salvage will be sufficient to rebuild upon." He rose to leave, then hesitated. "One final matter. There are rumors of emancipation proceedings regarding your status, Heir Potter." "Not rumors," Harry confirmed. "Legal filings have been prepared based on documented guardianship failures and recent attempts to manipulate my Muggle relatives. Such an unprecedented step for one so young." Ogden began. "The circumstances are equally unprecedented," Harry pointed out. "Unless the Ministry is prepared to acknowledge and correct the errors made in my placement after my parents' deaths." The minister seemed to age before their eyes. "I fear those decisions were made above my authority, even now. Be careful, young man. You challenge powers with longer memories than you might imagine." With a respectful nod to the room, he departed. "That was almost ominous," Hermione observed after the door closed. "It was a warning," Augusta corrected. "And a surprisingly personal one. Ogden sees the writing on the wall and wishes to spare you whatever consequences he foresees." Harry considered this perspective. "Or he's setting up his own political distance from whatever happens next. Either way, our course is clear." At precisely 9 o'clock, the enlarged Wizengamot chamber reached full capacity. The traditional purple-robed members occupied their tiered seats, while spectator galleries overflowed with observers. The international delegation, comprised of representatives from magical governments across Europe, the Americas, and Asia, occupied a specially designated section with enhanced translation charms. Dumbledore, no longer presiding as chief warlock but still commanding attention through sheer presence, sat among his closest allies. His expression remained inscrutable as Harry entered with his entourage. Minister Ogden called the session to order, his magically amplified voice bringing immediate silence to the chamber. Honored members of the Wizengamot, distinguished international observers, and citizens of magical Britain. We convene this emergency session to address serious allegations regarding ministry financial practices spanning several administrations. He gestured toward Harry's group. As the initiating party holds formal ancient house status, they have the right to present their case directly. The floor recognizes heir Harry James Potter. Harry approached the central speaking platform, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking his movement. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the quiet confidence born from months of preparation and absolute certainty in the justice of his cause. Honored Wizengamot, he began, his voice clear and steady. 1 year ago, I discovered documents revealing systematic theft from my family vaults following my parents' deaths. What began as a personal quest for answers has uncovered a pattern of financial exploitation affecting dozens of orphan children across magical Britain, practices continuing for generations under ministry authority. With methodical precision, Harry presented the evidence compiled over months of investigation. Magical projections displayed account statements, unauthorized withdrawal records, and official documents bearing the signatures of successive ministry officials. The pattern was undeniable. Orphan children with significant inheritances had their assets systematically diverted to ministry programs, personal accounts, and unofficial projects. This was not merely poor record-keeping or occasional emergency measures, Harry continued, as whispers spread through the chamber. It represents a deliberate system designed to exploit those least able to defend their interests, children without parents to protect them. He gestured to the Goblin delegation, who activated a complex magical projection showing the flow of funds across decades. The total misappropriated exceeds 300 million galleons since 1945 alone. Money that should have supported orphan children instead funded ministry operations without proper budgetary oversight or taxpayer accountability. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the scale became clear. Even previously skeptical Wiesengemot members appeared stunned by the meticulous documentation. But perhaps most disturbing, Harry continued, his voice hardening slightly, is that when this exploitation was discovered, those responsible didn't seek to correct it. Instead, they attempted to conceal evidence, manipulate witnesses, and yesterday, even tried to forcibly access sealed vaults at Gringotts using forged authorization. This revelation caused an uproar. Minister Ogden was forced to call for order 3 times before the chamber quieted enough for proceedings to continue. These are extremely serious allegations, the minister acknowledged, looking troubled. Does the ministry representative wish to respond? A wizard from the Department of Magical Treasury rose, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The ministry acknowledges certain procedural irregularities may have occurred during post-war reconstruction. However, we categorically deny any systematic exploitation. These were emergency measures during extraordinary times, emergency measures that continued for decades. Harry interjected. Affecting children born long after Voldemort's fall. The Treasury representative flinched at the name. The financial structures established during crisis periods sometimes persist through institutional inertia. This doesn't indicate malicious intent. Intent becomes irrelevant when patterns persist this long, Harry countered. The results speak for themselves. From the Wiesengemot seats, Dumbledore finally rose to speak. The chamber immediately hushed in anticipation. If I may offer perspective, he began, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had influenced magical policy for decades. The period following Lord Voldemort's first rise was indeed one of extraordinary challenges. Many decisions were made with limited information and pressing needs. He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. I do not dispute Harry Potter's central finding, that funds were directed from hereditary accounts to ministry operations. Where we may differ is in characterizing those transfers. What appears as misappropriation from one perspective might be seen as necessary reallocation during crisis from another. Harry had anticipated this approach. Dumbledore's specialty was reframing uncomfortable truths into ambiguous moral complexities. Perspective is valuable, Harry acknowledged, maintaining respectful tone despite his frustration. But certain facts remain objective. My parents will explicitly prohibited the very transfers that occurred under your authorization, Headmaster. Similar restrictions existed in most affected families' documents. He turned to address the chamber at large. This isn't about judging difficult wartime decisions. It's about acknowledging that systems designed for emergency circumstances became permanent mechanisms for avoiding proper financial accountability. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly, neither conceding nor challenging this assessment. His restraint suggested strategic calculation rather than genuine contrition. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from affected families presenting additional evidence while ministry defenders offered increasingly technical justifications for the documented transfers. The international observers watched with expressions ranging from shock to diplomatic neutrality, their presence ensuring proceedings remained focused on evidence rather than political maneuvering. By mid-afternoon, Minister Ogden called for a brief recess. Harry used this opportunity to confer with his allies in a private antechamber, reviewing their progress and adjusting strategy based on the ministry's defensive approach. They're attempting to frame everything as well-intentioned emergency measures, Hermione noted, organizing her extensive notes. Avoiding any admission of deliberate wrongdoing. Predictable, Augusta Longbottom replied. Acknowledging systemic corruption would create not just financial liability but potential criminal exposure for dozens of current and former officials. Harry nodded in agreement. Which is why our next phase focuses on the attempted cover-up rather than just the original misappropriation. Recent actions can't be dismissed as wartime necessity. Grip Hook, who had been consulting with other goblins via a secure communication device, looked up with satisfaction. Director Ragnarok has authorized me to present the evidence regarding yesterday's attempted vault breach. The international representatives are particularly interested in this treaty violation. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had shifted notably. What began as a historical financial inquiry had evolved into examination of active obstruction. The 4 ministry officials detained by Gringotts were brought before the Wiesengemot under formal evidentiary procedures, their testimonies secured by magically binding oaths. Undersecretary Umbridge instructed us to retrieve specific documents from the Potter vaults, admitted one Treasury official, looking distinctly uncomfortable under truth protocols. She provided the forged authorization and promised departmental protection if questioned. "And what documents were you seeking?" asked Madame Marchbanks, who led the questioning. "Records of transfers authorized by Minister Fudge to his personal accounts," the official replied. "And correspondence between former Minister Bagnold and Albus Dumbledore regarding the Potter guardianship arrangements." This revelation caused another stir through the chamber. Dumbledore's expression remained impassive, though Harry noted his hands clasped more tightly in his lap. As the testimonies continued, a pattern of deliberate obstruction emerged, not isolated incidents but coordinated efforts to conceal evidence of past misappropriation and prevent full disclosure. When Dolores Umbridge was called to address these allegations, she arrived flanked by personal legal counsel, her usual simpering manner replaced by tight-lipped defiance. "These officials clearly misunderstood their instructions," she claimed, voice honeyed despite her evident tension. "I never authorized any illegal access. Perhaps in their zeal to protect the ministry's interests, they exceeded their mandate. Under truth protocols, they've testified to written orders bearing your signature," Amelia Bones pointed out from her DMLE position. "Orders specifically directing them to retrieve documents implicating former Minister Fudge in financial impropriety." Umbridge's face flushed an ugly shade. "I categorically deny," she fell silent as Amelia produced a sealed evidence pouch. "This was recovered from your office this morning under Wiesengemot search authority. It contains draft orders matching exactly those described by the detained officials, written in your hand and bearing your magical signature." The chamber erupted again, forcing Minister Ogden to call for order. Umbridge appeared physically ill, her legal counsel whispering urgently in her ear. In light of this evidence, Ogden announced once order was restored, Undersecretary Umbridge is temporarily relieved of duties pending full investigation. Aurors will escort her from the chamber. As Umbridge was led away, still protesting her innocence, Harry exchanged glances with Hermione. This was a significant development, but still addressed individual misconduct rather than institutional reform. The final presentation came from the Goblin delegation, led by Director Ragnarok himself, an unprecedented appearance that emphasized Gringotts' view of the situation's gravity. For centuries, Gringotts has maintained neutrality in wizarding political affairs, the Goblin director began, his gravelly voice commanding attention. "Today we break the tradition because the violations documented threaten the very foundation of our banking treaties." Ragnarok presented evidence of systematic financial manipulation beyond even what Harry's team had uncovered, ministry interference with inheritance transfers, tampering with bloodline verification protocols, and deliberate misclassification of hereditary assets to enable unauthorized access. As of this morning, Ragnarok concluded, Gringotts has completed comprehensive audits of all affected accounts. The total misappropriation exceeds 500 million galleons when interest and growth potential are properly calculated. He paused, sharp teeth visible in what might have been a smile. Under banking treaty provisions, these amounts are now formally designated as defaulted debt owed by the Ministry of Magic to the affected families and their estates. The implications hit the chamber like a physical wave. 500 million galleons represented more than 3 years of the entire ministry's operating budget. Repayment would effectively bankrupt magical Britain's government. Minister Ogden appeared ashen as he addressed the Goblin director. "Surely some accommodation can be reached. Immediate repayment of such sums would collapse essential services, magical law enforcement, emergency response, St. Mungo's funding." Gringotts recognizes these practical concerns, Ragnarok acknowledged. "Which is why Heir Potter, as representative of the largest affected estate, has authorized me to present alternative resolution terms." All eyes turned to Harry as he approached the central platform once more. The chamber fell completely silent, even the international observers leaning forward in anticipation. "What happened cannot be undone," Harry began quietly. "No financial settlement can restore what was taken from me or the other children affected by these practices. We lost not just gold, but childhoods, family connections, and our rightful place in the wizarding world." He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the hushed chamber. "However, continuing the cycle of institutional destruction serves no one. Therefore, I propose the following resolution. First, complete restructuring of ministry financial governance under international oversight. Second, creation of a permanent trust for all orphaned magical children, funded by 15% of ministry tax revenue in perpetuity. Third, independent magical guardianship review for all minor heirs, removing those who have failed their responsibilities." Harry took a breath before delivering the most controversial element. "Finally, goblin representation on all financial regulatory bodies affecting inherited wealth and inter-family transfers. Their independence from wizarding politics makes them ideal guardians against future exploitation." The chamber erupted into chaotic discussion. Traditionalists appeared horrified at the suggestion of goblin involvement in wizarding governance, while progressives seemed cautiously supportive of the broader reforms. The international observers conferred among themselves, their reactions suggesting approval of the comprehensive approach. Minister Ogden struggled to restore order, finally resorting to a magical gavel that produced thunder-like booms until the chamber quieted. "These are extraordinary proposals," he managed, visibly processing their implications. "Implementation would require significant legislative action and constitutional changes to our governmental structure. The alternative," Harry pointed out calmly, "is Gringotts calling due all defaulted debt immediately, as is their right under treaty law. I've simply offered a pathway that allows essential services to continue while ensuring such abuses never recur." Dumbledore rose again, his expression grave yet somehow calculating. Young Harry's proposals demonstrate remarkable maturity and concern for the greater good. While some elements may require refinement, the core principles of accountability and protection for the vulnerable are worthy of serious consideration. Harry recognized the political maneuvering, Dumbledore positioning himself to influence whatever reforms emerged rather than opposing them directly. It was a skillful pivot, though Harry remained skeptical of the former Chief Warlock's ultimate intentions. After extended debate, Minister Ogden called for a structured vote on Harry's core proposals. To the surprise of many observers, each passed with substantial margins. The combination of international pressure, incontrovertible evidence, and the looming threat of financial collapse overcoming even entrenched resistance to change. "The Wisengamot has spoken," Ogden announced, looking simultaneously relieved and concerned. "Implementation committees will be formed immediately, with representation from affected families, ministry departments, Gringotts, and international observers." He turned toward Harry with a formal bow. "Heir Potter, your advocacy has precipitated perhaps the most significant governmental reform in magical Britain since the Statute of Secrecy. History will determine whether today represents destruction or rebirth of our institutions." As the formal session concluded, Harry felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that justice was being served, concern about the massive changes set in motion, and a strange emptiness where the driving purpose of the past year had been. He'd achieved more than he'd initially thought possible, yet the path forward remained uncertain. Augusta Longbottom placed a steadying hand on his shoulder as they exited the chamber. "Well done, Mr. Potter. Few wizards 3 times your age could have managed this with such composure." "It's not finished," Harry reminded her, watching ministry officials hurrying through corridors with expressions ranging from panic to determination. "Implementation will face resistance at every stage." "Of course," Augusta agreed. "Reform is never complete in a single day. But foundations matter, and you've helped establish ones built on justice rather than expediency." As they made their way toward Amelia's office, an urgent message arrived from Gringotts. The Dursleys had appeared at the bank, accompanied by ministry officials, demanding access to Harry's vaults as his legal guardians. "Perfect timing," Hermione muttered. Just as we're addressing ministry corruption. Or deliberate distraction, Harry suggested. Let's proceed with the emancipation filing immediately. The emancipation hearing, held in a smaller Wisengamot chamber with Madame Marchbanks presiding, proceeded with surprising efficiency. The combination of documented neglect at the Desleys, Harry's demonstrated financial maturity, and the ministry's compromised position regarding his guardianship created a compelling case for extraordinary measures. Vernon and Petunia Desley, clearly uncomfortable in magical surroundings, appeared primarily motivated by financial considerations rather than genuine concern for Harry's welfare. Their testimony inadvertently strengthened his case, as Vernon's complaints about the burden of raising Harry and Petunia's admission of keeping him uninformed about his heritage directly contradicted their guardianship responsibilities. "We never wanted the boy," Vernon finally blurted, face purple with frustration. "He was dumped on our doorstep without so much as a by your leave. If he's got money of his own, why should we have suffered all these years?" Madame Marchbanks peered over her spectacles with evident distaste. "Mr. Desley, are you suggesting your motivation for appearing today is financial compensation rather than concern for your nephew's welfare?" "Well, we deserve something for taking him in," Vernon insisted. "Feeding and clothing him all these years." Harry remained silent throughout this exchange, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his feelings. These people had kept him in a cupboard, fed him minimally, and clothed him in cast-offs while receiving monthly stipends for his care, payments they'd clearly never spent on him. After reviewing all evidence, including medical documentation of Harry's physical condition upon first entering Gringotts Sanctuary, Madame Marchbanks delivered her ruling. "The circumstances presented are indeed extraordinary. Herr Potter has demonstrated financial, magical, and personal maturity beyond his chronological age. The designated guardians have failed fundamental responsibilities of care and protection." She fixed the Desleys with a severe look before continuing. "Therefore, under Section 17 of the Magical Minors Protection Act, as amended by today's legislative action, I hereby grant limited emancipation to Harry James Potter with the following provisions: financial self-determination, residence self-selection, and educational decision-making authority." She looked directly at Harry. "You will retain a magical guardian for ceremonial purposes and emergency situations until age 11, at which time full emancipation will be automatically granted. This arrangement acknowledges your demonstrated capabilities while providing minimal necessary oversight during a transitional period." Harry nodded acceptance of these terms. "Thank you, Madame Marchbanks. I nominate Madame Augusta Longbottom to serve as ceremonial guardian, if she's willing." Augusta inclined her head in formal acceptance, while the Desleys looked simultaneously confused and disappointed that no financial settlement had materialized for them. "The Desleys are hereby relieved of all guardianship responsibilities and privileges regarding Harry James Potter," Madame Marchbanks concluded. "All previous arrangements are terminated effective immediately." As they exited the hearing chamber, Harry found himself face to face with his aunt and uncle for the first time in nearly a year. Vernon appeared ready to deliver some blustering complaint, but something in Harry's expression, a quiet confidence entirely unlike the frightened boy they'd known, made him hesitate. "I hope you got what you wanted from all this abnormality," Petunia finally said, her voice tight with disapproval. "What I wanted," Harry replied evenly, "was the family my parents intended for me to have. That was taken from me. What I've found instead is people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them or how well I can hide my true nature." He met his aunt's gaze directly. "My mother would be disappointed in how you honored her memory, Aunt Petunia. But I won't carry your bitterness forward in my life." Without waiting for response, Harry turned away from the Desleys for the final time. Their connection, such as it had been, was severed. Whatever blood protection might have once existed had been rendered meaningless by their fundamental rejection of who he was, a rejection now formalized in magical and mundane law alike. The days following the historic Wisengamot session unfolded in a blur of activity. Financial markets reacted dramatically to the reforms, with initial panic giving way to cautious optimism as implementation details emerged. The Daily Prophet, freed from ministry pressure by the collapse of the previous power structure, began publishing detailed accounts of the corruption that had precipitated the crisis. International magical governments, initially concerned about contagion effects from Britain's governmental reformation, gradually adopted supportive positions as the structured nature of the changes became clear. Several even began examining their own financial governance systems, conscious that similar vulnerabilities might exist elsewhere. For Harry personally, the most significant development was finalizing his permanent residence. With Gringotts' assistance, he had identified and restored a Potter property that had been sealed since his parents' deaths, a comfortable country house in Devon with extensive magical protections and enough distance from both magical and Muggle populations to provide privacy. Potter's Rest, Harry explained to Hermione and Neville as they toured the property together a week after the Wisengamot session. According to family records, it was a retreat used by Potter heirs for centuries, not as grand as the main family estate that was destroyed in the war, but protected by older, deeper magic. The house itself was modest by wealthy wizarding standards, a two-story stone structure with warm wooden interiors and comfortable, unpretentious furnishings. Its most remarkable features were invisible to casual observation: layered protection wards, spatial expansion charms that created room for an extensive library, and magical gardens designed for both beauty and practical potion ingredients. "It feels peaceful," Hermione observed, running her hand along a bookshelf that seemed to hum with welcoming magic. "Like it's been waiting for you." "The house recognizes Potter blood," Harry confirmed. "The family journals say it adapts to each heir's needs and preferences. I've already noticed changes, the library expanding in areas we've been studying, the kitchen stocking foods I prefer." Neville, examining the enchanted gardens with particular interest, looked up. "Will you live here alone?" "That seems lonely," Harry finished for him with a small smile. "No. Augusta has arranged for a retired professor, Eliza Winterbourne, to serve as resident tutor and household manager. She'll live in the East Wing with her husband, who's a botanical researcher. They're both extended members of the Longbottom Alliance families and have signed magical confidentiality agreements." As they continued exploring, Harry found himself appreciating the symmetry of his situation. After beginning his journey in the cramped confines of a cupboard, he now had a true home, one connected to his family heritage, designed for both security and comfort. The injustice that had defined his early childhood had been addressed through systemic reform that would protect other vulnerable children. Yet he harbored no illusions about the challenges still ahead. Dumbledore, though politically diminished, remained headmaster of Hogwarts and influential among key magical factions. The former chief warlock had demonstrated remarkable adaptability during the crisis, positioning himself as a moderate voice for reform rather than an obstacle to it. More concerning were reports from Amelia Bones about increased activity among suspected Voldemort sympathizers. The upheaval in magical governance had created opportunities for various factions to maneuver for advantage, including those with darker ambitions. "You've accomplished remarkable things," Hermione observed that evening as they sat in the library reviewing their ongoing projects. "But sometimes I worry about the attention you've drawn. Not everyone will appreciate the changes you've initiated." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "I know. That's why the next phase focuses on preparation rather than public advocacy. Building skills, knowledge, and alliances quietly while the institutional reforms proceed on their own momentum." This strategic pivot had already begun. Harry's daily schedule now included intensive magical training with specialized tutors, studying family grimoires recovered from Potter vaults, and regular correspondence with allies across magical Britain and beyond. While the public narrative portrayed him as having retreated from political involvement to focus on normal childhood activities, the reality involved methodical preparation for challenges he knew lay ahead. One unexpected development during this transition period came from an official Hogwarts owl delivering correspondence not to Harry but to Hermione. The letter, bearing Dumbledore's distinctive seal, contained an offer of early admission to a special preparatory program for exceptionally gifted magical children identified before standard Hogwarts age. "He's trying to separate us," Hermione realized immediately, showing Harry the letter. "Offering me special opportunity while isolating you from one of your closest allies." Harry studied the carefully worded invitation. It's cleverly done. He knows you value education and intellectual recognition above almost anything else. Not above friendship and principles, she replied firmly, already drafting a polite declination. Besides, our current tutors are covering material beyond first-year Hogwarts level already. This offer provides no actual educational advantage. Harry smiled, grateful once again for her loyalty and perception. He'll try other approaches. Dumbledore plays a long game. So do we, Hermione countered with determination. 3 days before Harry's 8th birthday, a more concerning development emerged. During a routine security sweep of Potter's Rest, Bill Weasley, a Gringotts cursebreaker assigned to maintain the property's protective enchantments, discovered evidence of attempted ward tampering. Professional work, the young redhead reported, showing Harry the magical traces. Someone tested the outer boundaries for weaknesses. They didn't breach anything, but they were mapping the protection structure. Harry frowned. Assessment rather than actual attack. Exactly, Bill confirmed. Gathering intelligence for potential future access. If I hadn't been specifically looking for trace magical signatures, I'd have missed it entirely. Dumbledore? Hermione suggested, looking concerned. Bill shook his head. Different magical signature pattern. Dumbledore's magic has distinctive harmonics, most powerful wizards do. This was darker. More aggressive probing. The implications were troubling. While political opponents might employ various pressures or legal maneuvers, only someone with more sinister intentions would attempt to breach the wards of an ancient house heir's residence. Increase security protocols, Harry instructed, mind racing through contingencies they developed. Activate the secondary ward layer and implement visitor restrictions until we identify the source. That evening, as Harry reviewed warding diagrams with Bill, an urgent message arrived from Amelia Bones. The encryption pattern indicated highest security priority, causing Harry's enchanted communication mirror to emit a distinctive chime. Heir Potter, Amelia began without preamble when he activated the connection. We've intercepted concerning intelligence. A group of former Voldemort sympathizers appears to be coordinating activity focused on your location. We've detained 2 individuals attempting to purchase restricted ingredients commonly used in certain dark rituals. Harry maintained his composure despite the chill that ran down his spine. Connected to the ward probing discovered today? Almost certainly, Amelia confirmed. The timing suggests coordinated reconnaissance preceding direct action. I've dispatched a security detail to supplement your existing protections, but I recommend considering temporary relocation until we've neutralized the threat. After consulting with Augusta and Griphook via secure communication, Harry implemented their most restrictive security protocol, activating the property's ancient defense system that essentially removed Potter's Rest from normal magical accessibility, making it unplottable and restricting entry to those keyed directly to the Blood Ward matrix. 2 days later, the wisdom of these precautions became dramatically apparent. Shortly after midnight, alarms triggered throughout the property as multiple attackers attempted to breach the outer perimeter from different directions simultaneously. The assault was sophisticated and clearly well-planned, exactly the sort of operation that might have succeeded had the security not been recently enhanced. 7 attackers, reported Kingsley Shacklebolt, the senior Auror commanding Amelia's security detail. Working in coordinated teams with counter-ward equipment. We've detained 4, 3 escaped when the primary defense system activated. Harry, awakened by the alarms, joined the security assessment in the property's monitoring room. Magical displays showed the neutralized attackers now secured in specially warded holding cells beneath the house, a security feature Harry hadn't even known existed until the property's defenses had automatically activated it. Any identification? He asked, studying the surveillance images. 2 are known associates of Death Eaters who avoided Azkaban after the war, Kingsley confirmed. The others appear to be mercenaries, hired muscle rather than ideological actors. Interrogation. In progress with the Ministry team. Preliminary indications suggest they were hired through intermediaries, no direct connection to whoever organized the attempt. The attack, while concerning, hadn't actually breached even the outermost defensive layer. Yet its sophistication and timing raised disturbing questions. Who had both the resources and motivation to mount such an operation? The political opponents Harry had made through his financial reforms might wish to intimidate or pressure him, but actual assassination attempts suggested darker motives. By morning, Amelia herself arrived to oversee the investigation. "We've identified the 3 who escaped," she reported grimly. All former Voldemort supporters who claimed imperious influence after his fall. This wasn't a political operation, it has all the hallmarks of ideological violence. "Because of what we uncovered about the Ministry?" Harry asked. Amelia shook her head. "The interrogation suggests something more specific. The captured attackers were told you possess artifacts of the Dark Lord that must be reclaimed for the cause of purification." Harry exchanged troubled glances with Hermione, who had joined them in the secure conference room. "I possess nothing of Voldemort's." "Perhaps they meant your connection through the scar," Hermione suggested quietly. "There have always been theories about how you survived the killing curse." Whatever their belief, Amelia continued, this represents a significant escalation. Random threats are one thing, coordinated paramilitary operations suggest organization and resources beyond typical remnant Death Eater activity. The failed attack precipitated a comprehensive security review that extended beyond Potter's Rest to all locations regularly frequented by Harry and his closest allies. Enhanced protection protocols were implemented at Longbottom Manor. The Grangers received magical security upgrades for their home and dental practice. Gringotts assigned additional security specialists to monitor connected properties. Harry's 8th birthday arrived amid this heightened security environment. Though a celebration had been planned at Potter's Rest, Augusta insisted on relocating it to Longbottom Manor, where generations of accumulated family protections provided greater depth of security than Harry's newly reactivated residence. Despite the circumstances, the gathering maintained a deliberately normal atmosphere. Neville, whose birthday had been just the previous day, shared the celebration. The Grangers attended, as did select allies who had supported Harry's reform initiatives. Even Susan Bones joined the party, her friendship with Harry having developed gradually through his connection with her Aunt Amelia. "Not exactly how I imagined celebrating turning 8, Harry admitted to Hermione as they watched magical fireworks designed by the Weasley twins illuminate the evening garden. "Security teams outnumbering guests wasn't in my original plan." Hermione smiled sympathetically. "At least you're celebrating with people who genuinely care about you. That's more than you had this time last year." Harry nodded, acknowledging the truth in her observation. Despite the complications and dangers that had emerged, his fundamental situation had improved immeasurably since discovering that magical trunk in the Dursleys' attic. Late that evening, after most guests had departed, Harry received an unexpected visitor. Albus Dumbledore, having apparently secured Augusta's reluctant permission, arrived bearing a small package wrapped in midnight blue paper with moving silver stars. "Happy birthday, Harry," the headmaster greeted him, blue eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. "I hope you'll accept this small token along with my congratulations on reaching another year." Harry accepted the package with appropriate courtesy, if limited warmth. "Thank you, headmaster. This is unexpected. Perhaps overdue," Dumbledore acknowledged. "Our recent interactions have been rather focused on weightier matters than personal occasions." Under Hermione's watchful gaze, Harry carefully opened the gift. Inside lay a small, silvery cloak that seemed to flow like liquid in his hands. "Your father's invisibility cloak," Dumbledore explained. "James loaned it to me shortly before that terrible Halloween. I've kept it safe these many years, waiting for the proper time to return it to its rightful heir." Harry stared at the cloak, emotions warring within him. This was a genuine connection to his father, something James Potter had touched and used. Yet its return now, after Dumbledore had kept it for nearly 7 years without mention, carried unmistakable political overtones. "Thank you," Harry said finally, genuine appreciation for the family connection tempered by awareness of the gesture's timing. "I'll treasure it." It's a remarkable magical artifact, Dumbledore continued conversationally. Most invisibility cloaks fade with time, their enchantments weakening. This one has remained perfect for generations. A true Potter heirloom. Harry nodded, recognizing the implied information. This wasn't merely a useful magical tool but something with deeper significance to his family heritage. I wonder, Dumbledore mused, his tone deliberately casual, if recent security concerns might prompt reconsideration of your educational arrangements. Hogwarts remains the safest magical location in Britain, with protections refined over a millennium. Early admission could be arranged, given your exceptional circumstances. And there it was, the true purpose behind the birthday visit and meaningful gift. Dumbledore was attempting to bring Harry back under his direct influence, using legitimate security concerns as justification. My current arrangements are quite secure, Harry replied carefully. As recent events demonstrated, the Potter family protections are remarkably effective even against coordinated attack. Indeed they are, Dumbledore acknowledged. Though I wonder if you're aware of their full nature and origin. When Harry remained silent, the headmaster continued. The Potter defensive magic draws on particularly ancient principles, sacrificial protection reinforced through generations of family intention. Not unlike the protection your mother provided through her sacrifice, but operating on a broader scale. Harry filed this information away for later research, maintaining a neutral expression. I appreciate your concern, Headmaster. For now, I'll continue with my established educational program while reviewing security as needed. Dumbledore accepted this polite rejection with good grace, though Harry detected a flicker of disappointment behind the twinkling facade. After exchanging pleasantries with Augusta and others present, the headmaster departed, leaving Harry contemplating both the returned cloak and the implications of Dumbledore's continued interest in his arrangements. He's still maneuvering, Hermione observed after Dumbledore had gone. Using your father's possession as both gesture of goodwill and reminder of connection. And information about the family protections as both helpful warning and demonstration of superior knowledge, Harry added, running his fingers over the cloak's remarkably fluid material. Dumbledore never says or does anything with just one purpose. The failed attack and Dumbledore's visit marked a transition point in Harry's post-ministry reform planning. Security considerations now featured prominently in all decisions, with greater emphasis on magical defense training and strategic preparation for various threat scenarios. One unexpected outcome of these developments was accelerated progress in Harry's magical education. The security situation justified more intensive practical instruction than typically permitted for pre-Hogwarts children, with Amelia Bones officially authorizing expanded training under emergency provisions of the underage magic restrictions. By late August, Harry's magical progress had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. During a routine visit to monitor his development, Griselda Marchbanks, who in addition to her Wisengamot responsibilities served on the Magical Education Examination Authority, expressed surprise at his advancement. Most unusual development pattern, she noted after observing Harry's practical demonstrations. Your raw power is appropriate for your age, perhaps slightly advanced. But your control and precision are remarkable, more like what we see in focused 13 or 14-year-olds. We've emphasized control exercises specifically, Harry explained. Professor Winterbourne believes establishing proper technique first creates better foundation for when power naturally increases with age. Wise approach, Marchbanks agreed. Though there's something else. She studied him thoughtfully. Your magical signature has unusual harmonics. Almost as if. May I ask when you claimed your heir rings? Last year, Harry replied. Shortly after discovering my heritage. Marchbanks nodded as if confirming a theory. The Potter family magic is particularly responsive to early heirs. Historical records mention similar patterns when inheritance occurs before magical maturity. The family magic essentially helps shape developing magical pathways. This information aligned with observations Harry had made himself. Certain spells came to him with unusual intuitive ease, particularly those related to protection, concealment, and certain forms of transfiguration that family journals mentioned as traditional Potter strengths. Is this common knowledge? Harry asked, suddenly concerned about potential security implications. Hardly, Marchbanks assured him. Ancient house magical inheritance patterns are closely guarded family matters. I'm only familiar with the broader principles through my examination authority work with hereditary magic manifestation. She fixed him with a penetrating look. Though I suspect certain others with historical interests might have similar awareness. Dumbledore, Harry realized. The headmaster's comments about Potter protective magic suddenly gained new context. In the months following his birthday, Harry maintained the careful balance between public withdrawal and private preparation that characterized his post-ministry reform strategy. To the wizarding public, he appeared to have retreated from political involvement to focus on appropriate childhood development, with occasional ceremonial appearances at Gringotts or ministry functions related to the ongoing reforms. Behind this carefully cultivated image, however, Harry's days filled with intensive magical training, strategic planning sessions, and continued investigation into both his family history and Voldemort's activities before and during the war. The attack on his residence had confirmed that genuine threats remained, requiring constant vigilance and preparation. By December, the most dramatic institutional reforms had been implemented. The ministry now operated under new financial governance with both international oversight and Goblin participation in key regulatory bodies. The Magical Orphans Protection Act ensured no future child would suffer the financial exploitation Harry and others had experienced. The Heir Protection Registry provided additional safeguards for hereditary assets during minority periods. These changes, while significant, represented only the beginning of what Harry recognized would be generational work to transform Wizarding Britain's governance culture. The systems that had enabled corruption were deeply embedded in societal structures that resisted rapid change. Progress occurs in waves, Augusta Longbottom observed during one of their regular strategy sessions. We've achieved the first wave of reform, addressing the most egregious financial abuses and creating structural accountability. The next waves will come more slowly, as people adjust to new expectations and younger generations assume leadership positions. Harry understood this perspective, though part of him chafed at the gradual pace of deeper change. His own experiences had made patience difficult when he considered other children potentially suffering under flawed systems. The new year brought fresh challenges and opportunities. International magical cooperation had increased significantly following Britain's governmental reforms, creating openings for educational exchange that Harry, Hermione, and Neville enthusiastically embraced. Correspondence with young witches and wizards from various magical traditions broadened their understanding beyond British approaches to magic. Particularly valuable were connections with the North American Magical Academy system, where practical defense against dark magic received greater emphasis than in the traditional Hogwarts curriculum. Through carefully arranged private instruction, Harry began incorporating elements of these alternative approaches into his training regimen. As winter gave way to spring, rumors began circulating about significant changes coming to Hogwarts itself. The school's Board of Governors, influenced by broader reform momentum, had commissioned a comprehensive curriculum review focused on modernization and international best practices. Though Dumbledore remained headmaster, his absolute authority over educational decisions had been somewhat constrained by new oversight mechanisms. "He's adapting rather than resisting," Hermione noted as they reviewed newspaper accounts of the changes. Positioning himself as a moderate reformer guiding necessary modernization rather than opposing it outright. Harry nodded, recognizing Dumbledore's political skill. It's his pattern. Yield formal authority while maintaining influence over implementation. The question is whether the changes will be substantive or merely cosmetic. By late spring, as preparations accelerated for Harry's upcoming 9th birthday, a formal evaluation of his educational progress provided unexpected validation of their independent approach. Examiners from the Ministry's Educational Standards Office, conducting assessment of all known pre-Hogwarts magical children receiving structured instruction, registered surprise at the breadth and depth of Harry, Hermione, and Neville's magical development. Academically, you three are performing at levels typically associated with third-year Hogwarts students in theory and second-year in practical application, the lead examiner reported. Most unusual for children your age, particularly the practical achievements given normal magical core development patterns. This official recognition strengthened Augusta's petition for expanded educational options, securing ministry approval for more advanced training materials and specialized instructors typically reserved for older students. It also, however, attracted renewed attention from Dumbledore, who requested a meeting with Harry to discuss educational pathways appropriate for your remarkable development. "He's persistent," Harry observed when the formal invitation arrived. "Though I suspect this is less about my education and more about Voldemort-related matters he hasn't yet shared." After consultation with his advisors, Harry agreed to meet the headmaster at a neutral location, the ministry's Educational Affairs Department, with Augusta present as his guardian. The meeting, scheduled for late June, would be Harry's first direct interaction with Dumbledore since the birthday gift delivery nearly a year earlier. The appointed day found Harry prepared both mentally and magically. His occlumency training, while still developing, had progressed significantly under private instruction arranged through Gringotts' international connections. Additional protective charms reinforced his natural mental defenses, making casual legilimency impossible without detection. Dumbledore arrived precisely on time, projecting his usual aura of benign authority. His robes, while still distinctly unconventional with animated constellations drifting across midnight blue fabric, were more subdued than his typical flamboyant attire, a subtle acknowledgement of the meeting's formal nature. "Harry, Madam Longbottom," he greeted them warmly. "Thank you for agreeing to this conversation. The reports of your educational progress have impressed many at Hogwarts, myself included." "Thank you, Headmaster," Harry replied with appropriate politeness. "Our tutors have been excellent." After exchanging further pleasantries, they settled into the meeting room's comfortable chairs. A ministry educational liaison remained present but uninvolved, her role primarily ensuring procedural propriety rather than active participation. "I've requested this meeting," Dumbledore began, "because your magical development presents both opportunities and considerations worth discussing as you approach Hogwarts age. While still some years away, decisions made now will shape your eventual transition to formal magical education. We've been following standard pre-Hogwarts curriculum with appropriate adaptations for accelerated learning," Augusta noted. "All ministry approved and documented." "Indeed, and most impressively implemented," Dumbledore acknowledged. However, Harry's situation contains unique elements that standard educational pathways may not adequately address. "My connection to Voldemort, you mean," Harry said directly, watching for Dumbledore's reaction. The headmaster's expression revealed mild surprise at Harry's directness, but he recovered smoothly. "That is certainly one aspect requiring consideration. Your scar represents an unprecedented magical circumstance, the only known case of survival from the killing curse. Its long-term magical implications remain necessarily speculative." "What do you believe those implications might be, Headmaster?" Harry asked. "You've had nearly 8 years to study the matter." Dumbledore regarded Harry thoughtfully before responding. "I believe your scar represents more than merely a curse mark. It forms a connection, though the precise nature of that connection remains unclear even after considerable research." This acknowledgement of ongoing study confirmed Harry's suspicion that Dumbledore had been investigating his unique situation for years, despite never sharing findings or concerns with Harry himself. "A connection that might explain the attack on my residence last year?" Harry pressed. "The assailants reportedly believed I possessed artifacts of the Dark Lord." "Perhaps," Dumbledore allowed. "Though I suspect that particular misconception stems from distorted information among Voldemort's former supporters rather than any factual basis." The conversation continued in this manner, Harry asking direct questions, Dumbledore providing partial information wrapped in qualifications and broader context. They discussed Harry's unusual magical development, the Potter family magic's apparent influence, and potential specialized training that might complement his existing program. Throughout the exchange, Harry maintained awareness of what remained unsaid. Dumbledore offered no explanation for his original placement with the Dursleys, no acknowledgement of the suppression charms discovered and removed by Gringotts Cursebreakers, no direct admission regarding unauthorized financial activities involving Potter assets. Your generous offer of specialized instruction is appreciated, Harry said as the meeting concluded. I'll discuss the possibilities with my guardians and tutors to determine what might integrate effectively with my current program. Dumbledore nodded, seemingly satisfied with this noncommittal response. I remain available for consultation whenever you might find it helpful, Harry. Despite our complex history, I believe we share fundamental goals regarding your development and eventual role in our world. That final phrase, eventual role in our world, lingered in Harry's thoughts long after the meeting concluded. It confirmed his suspicion that Dumbledore continued viewing him primarily through the lens of prophecy and Voldemort's eventual return rather than as a young wizard entitled to normal development and self-determination. He revealed more than he intended, Harry observed to Hermione and Neville that evening as they reviewed the meeting's details at Potter's Rest. His persistent interest suggests information he hasn't shared, something beyond the known prophecy and my survival of the killing curse. Something about your scar specifically, Hermione agreed. He kept returning to that connection concept without explicitly defining it. Gran says Dumbledore's been researching ancient magic since the attack on your parents, Neville added. Requesting access to family libraries with collections on soul magic and magical transference. This information aligned with patterns they'd observed in Dumbledore's limited disclosures. Whatever the headmaster suspected about Harry's connection to Voldemort involved magical principles beyond standard curriculum, principles potentially related to how the Dark Lord had survived his apparent destruction that Halloween night. As Harry approached his 9th birthday, he found himself in a paradoxical position. The financial and governmental reforms he'd initiated had largely succeeded, creating genuine institutional improvement across magical Britain. His personal circumstances had transformed from neglected orphan to respected heir with appropriate education and resources. Yet deeper mysteries remained, about his parents' deaths, his connection to Voldemort, and Dumbledore's continuing interest in his eventual role. These questions would require patience and strategic preparation to resolve. Unlike the financial abuses, which could be addressed through documentation and legal processes, the threats surrounding Voldemort's potential return involved prophecy, ancient magic, and forces beyond conventional understanding. On the evening before his 9th birthday, Harry stood at the window of his study at Potter's Rest, watching summer twilight settle over the gardens his mother's family had tended for generations. The past 2 years had brought changes he could never have imagined while lying in his cupboard at Privet Drive: justice for financial wrongs, connection with his heritage, and the beginning of true magical education. Yet he recognized that his journey had only begun. Voldemort's supporters remained active, gathering resources and information. Dumbledore continued his careful maneuvering, balancing public accommodation of reforms with private pursuit of undisclosed agendas. The wizarding world itself struggled to adapt to new governance structures while maintaining essential services and traditions. Through all this complexity, Harry maintained focus on principles that had guided him since discovering his true heritage: justice for the vulnerable, accountability for the powerful, and preparation for challenges he knew lay ahead. The 8-year-old who had bankrupted a corrupt ministry now approached his 9th birthday with both the satisfaction of meaningful achievement and clear-eyed awareness of continuing responsibility. As darkness fell, Harry returned to his desk where a journal lay open, part of his nightly routine of recording observations and plans. His quill hovered over the parchment briefly before he wrote a simple entry that encapsulated both reflection and resolution: 2 years since finding the trunk. Much accomplished, more remaining. Tomorrow begins year 3. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.